All right, so welcome to another deep dive, everybody. Today we're going to be looking at something a little different. We're not going to be looking at a specific piece of content or article or anything like that. Instead, we are diving headfirst into documentation.
Documentation. Yeah, we're going to be your guides for this one. We're going to be taking a look at the OpenAI documentation, which is a really valuable resource if you are at all interested in building anything with AI.
And we know that you, our listener, you're interested in AI, you're interested in building stuff, and we know you've got about 3 months of Python experience under your belt at this point, so we want to make sure that this deep dive is really approachable for you.
Yeah, we're going to try to break down some of the jargon and explain the key concepts in a way that makes sense even if you're just getting started with Python.
So where do we even begin, right? I mean, the OpenAI documentation, it's huge. It's like this massive sprawling, how do we find our way around this thing?
Well, there's a section called Developer Quickstart, and that's really the perfect jumping off point for anyone who's new to OpenAI. It's designed to give you a taste of what's possible, and it's even got a really short Python code snippet that you can use to make your first API call.
Oh, yeah, I saw that code snippet. I was really impressed. It's only 9 lines long.
Yeah, it's super concise, and it basically just shows you how to set up your connection to OpenAI, choose an AI model like GPT-4, and then tell it to create a chat completion. It's like saying, hey, GPT-4, let's chat. I want you to write a haiku about AI for me.
That's so cool. I mean, that's so cool that in just 9 lines of code, you can have a conversation with one of the most advanced AI models in the world.
Yeah, it really is. And, for our listener who's still getting comfortable with Python, I think it's worth explaining what an API call actually is.
Yeah, that's a good point, because I think a lot of people hear that term API call, and they're like, what does that even mean?
So think of it like ordering takeout. You browse the menu, that's like the documentation, and you choose what you want, your order. In this case, the code snippet is like telling the restaurant, the OpenAI API, exactly what dish you want, and then they deliver the food, or in our case, the AI's response to your request.
That's such a good analogy. I love that. Okay, so we've made our first API call. We've tasted the power of AI, but now we're ready for more. Right. We want to dive deeper into the documentation and figure out what else we can build.
Absolutely. And that's where the Explore Our Guides section comes in. It's like a treasure trove of information. It's
Wow.
full of detailed guides for specific tasks and challenges. So no matter what you're trying to build with AI, you're likely to find a guide that can help you.
Oh, I definitely saw that section. There are guides for everything. It's amazing. There's one about prompt engineering, which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah, prompt engineering is super important. It's basically the art of crafting effective prompts for the AI. It's kind of like writing code, but instead of writing instructions for the computer, you're writing instructions for the AI.
And I know our listener has some Python experience, so I think they can really appreciate that analogy, just like in Python, where you have to be very specific with your syntax and your commands in prompt engineering. You have to be very specific with your language and your phrasing to get the AI to do what you want.
Yeah, exactly. You have to think carefully about what information you give the AI, what tone you use, and even what examples you provide to guide its responses.
So it's not just about giving the AI a task. It's about giving it the right instructions to complete that task successfully.
Exactly. And the guides in the Explore Our Guides section can really help you master the art of prompt engineering.
And it's not just prompt engineering. There are guides for so many other important topics like optimizing speed and ensuring safety. I mean, it seems like OpenAI has really thought of everything.
They really have, and that's one of the things that makes the OpenAI documentation so valuable. It's not just a technical reference, it's a comprehensive resource for anyone who wants to build safe and effective AI applications.
So we've talked about the Developer Quickstart and the Explore Our Guide section, but there's still so much more to discover in the OpenAI documentation. What are some other areas that you think our listeners should be aware of?
Well, one area that I'm really excited about is the Assistance API. It's a relatively new feature that lets you build conversational AIs that can do some pretty amazing things.
Like what kind of things?
Well, imagine having an AI assistant that can search through your files and answer questions based on them. Like you could ask it to find a specific email from a certain date, or to summarize a long document, or even to create a presentation based on your notes.
Wow, that would be a game changer.
Yeah.
I mean, I spend so much time every day just sifting through emails and documents. That would be incredible.
And the Assistance API makes it possible. It's a really powerful tool for building AI applications that can streamline your workflow and boost your productivity.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I'm definitely going to have to check that out. And I also saw something about structured outputs. What's that all about?
So structured outputs is all about control. It lets you define the format of the AI's responses so you don't have to wrestle with them to make them usable.
Can you give me an example?
Sure. Let's say you need the AI to give you data in a very specific format, like a table or JSON with structured outputs. You can tell the AI exactly how you want the data to be structured so you don't have to spend time cleaning it up or converting it.
Oh, that makes sense. So it's like asking for your takeout order in a specific container, way easier to handle.
Exactly. It just makes everything so much smoother and more efficient.
And looking at the documentation, there's just so much here. I mean, we have real-time API, async, batch processing. It's kind of overwhelming in a good way. It's
Yeah.
like OpenAI is about way more than just generating text.
You're absolutely right. The real-time API, for example, is for building super responsive AI experiences like chatbots that feel like you're talking to a real person. And then you have features like async and batch processing, which are more for when you need to run large jobs or handle tons of tasks at scale. But those are deeper dives for another day.
We could probably do a whole deep dive on each of those features and still only scratch the surface. But I think we've given our listener a really good overview of the OpenAI documentation and all the amazing things that are possible with it.
I agree. And I hope our listeners feeling inspired to start building their own AI applications.
Me too. But where should they go from here? They've explored the documentation. They've got all these ideas swirling around in their head. What's the next step?
Well, I think the best thing to do is to start small. Think about a simple project that you could build using the OpenAI API, something that aligns with your interests and your Python skills.
Yeah, and don't be afraid to experiment. Try different things. See what works, see what doesn't. The OpenAI documentation is a great resource for learning, and there are so many people out there who are willing to help.
And speaking of help, I would definitely recommend checking out the developer forum. It's a fantastic place to connect with other developers, ask questions, share your projects, and get inspiration from what others are building.
That's a great tip. And one last thing that I would add is that the OpenAI documentation is constantly evolving. New features are being added all the time, so it's important to keep checking back for updates.
Absolutely. The world of AI is moving fast, and you don't want to get left behind.
So stay curious, stay engaged, and keep building amazing things with AI. That's what this is all about.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
All right, that's our deep dive for today. Thanks for joining us.
See you next time.
Bye. Okay, so you've been learning Python for, about 3 months now, and you're ready to tackle AI,
Sounds about right.
which is awesome.
Yeah.
But the OpenAI documentation,
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
it can be a little intimidating.
To say the least, yeah.
So today we're going to do a deep dive into those docs, but more importantly, we're going to build a mental roadmap.
Yeah, like a cheat sheet.
Exactly, so that you know what to expect.
Yeah. Yeah. Even for people who've been coding for a while, those docs can be a jungle. So
Oh, absolutely.
we're going to give you the lay of the land so you know what to look for and why it matters.
All right, so one of the first things that jumps out at you when you land on the OpenAI documentation is this thing called an API key.
Right out of the gate.
Yeah, what is that and why is it so important?
So the API key is basically your golden ticket. It's like a super secure password that lets you tap into OpenAI's powerful AI models.
Uh-huh.
Without it, you can't really do anything.
Right.
And that's why the documentation really stresses, keeping it safe.
Yeah, it's like more sensitive than your average password.
Oh, for sure.
Because it's the keys to the kingdom.
Yeah, exactly. It's giving
Yeah.
you access to all this really sophisticated stuff.
Yeah.
And they actually suggest storing it in this .chrc file
Yeah. Yeah.
for a Python newbie like myself.
Yeah.
What is that?
Okay, so .chrc, that's a configuration file used by some operating systems.
Okay.
Don't worry too much about the specifics for now.
Okay.
The main takeaway is you want to store this key somewhere safe,
Okay.
separate from your code.
Right.
There are other ways Python developers typically handle this, like environment variables, but the important part is that your key isn't directly visible in your code.
Right. Got it. Keep it secret. Keep it safe.
Exactly.
Okay, so we got our API key tucked away.
What's next?
This is where the fun begins. You make your first API request.
Ooh.
So this is where you're actually sending instructions to OpenAI and getting a response back.
Okay.
It's a little bit like having a conversation,
Uh-huh.
but instead of talking to a person, you're talking to an AI.
I like it.
Yeah.
Okay, now the documentation, it uses JavaScript for its examples.
It does.
Does that mean I need to learn JavaScript before I can even touch OpenAI with Python?
Not at all.
Okay, good.
While the examples are in JavaScript, the underlying principles are the same
Okay.
across different programming languages.
Gotcha.
It's like learning to drive.
Uh-huh.
Once you know the rules of the road, you can drive any car, even if the dashboard looks a little different.
Right.
So focus on understanding the concepts,
Okay.
and the Python part will follow naturally.
That makes a lot of sense. That's reassuring.
Yeah.
Now, one thing that caught my eye in the documentation was this idea of creating human-like responses.
Yeah, that's the holy grail, isn't it?
Yeah, how is that even possible? Is the
Yeah.
AI actually thinking?
That's a great question, and it really gets to the heart of what makes OpenAI so fascinating.
Uh-huh.
It's not really thinking in the way that humans do, but it's been trained on a massive amount of text data and code. This training allows it to generate text that's often indistinguishable from something a human would write.
So in a way, it's mimicking human conversation based on patterns it's learned.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the documentation even has this simple example where you can generate a haiku with just a few lines of code.
Haiku.
Yeah.
I know it seems a little...
Yeah, it sounds more like a party trick than like, human-like response.
But think about it.
Okay.
You're giving it a simple instruction in plain English.
Uh-huh.
Write a haiku.
Right.
And the AI understands what you mean.
Okay.
It follows the rules of haiku structure, and it creates something new.
Yeah.
That's pretty amazing when you break it down.
Okay, I'm starting to see it.
Yeah.
It's not just spitting out pre-programmed responses.
Right.
It's actually processing and understanding what you're asking it.
Exactly. And this leads to the next important point.
Okay.
OpenAI isn't just one giant AI. It's a whole collection of different models, each specialized for different tasks.
The haiku example uses GPT-4 Mini.
Oh.
But there are others for image generation, translation, and much more.
So it really is like a toolbox.
It is a toolbox.
Okay, and speaking of tools, the next steps section in the documentation lists all sorts of things.
Oh, yeah.
Image generation embeddings, text-to-speech.
It's a lot.
I'm already getting overwhelmed.
Yeah.
Where do I even begin?
I know it can feel like you've been given the keys to a candy store,
It really does.
but you don't need to learn everything at once.
Go.
Focus on building that solid foundation first.
Okay.
And then you can explore all these amazing tools.
Solid foundation it is.
Yeah.
But to pique our listeners' curiosity, they're just starting out with Python. What's one thing from that list that they might find particularly intriguing?
Since they are still relatively new to Python, how about something like generating creative text formats?
Okay.
Think about creating a program that can write different kinds of poems
Mm-hmm.
or even scripts for short stories.
Yeah.
It's a fun way to start flexing those Python muscles.
Right. And see the power of OpenAI.
Okay, so to recap, we've covered the all-important API key, dipped our toes into the structure of requests, and learned that OpenAI is like a giant toolbox full of specialized AIs.
That's right.
What an episode.
It's a lot to take in.
Yeah.
But the key takeaway here is don't get bogged down by the complexity of the documentation right away.
Right.
Focus on the big picture concepts.
Yeah.
Experiment with simple examples.
Mm-hmm.
And gradually build your understanding.
Yeah.
The more you explore, the more comfortable you'll become.
Absolutely. And you'll be surprised at how quickly you start to make sense of it all.
Yeah, you will.
And who knows, maybe in a few months you'll be building those AI-powered story generators you were just dreaming about.
There you go.
Until then, happy coding, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.
See ya.
Bye!
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're going to be tackling something that might seem a little daunting at first, the OpenAI documentation. And we're doing this especially for, well, those of you who are relatively new to Python, so let's say, with about 3 months of coding experience.
Yeah, the goal is to build a roadmap. We'll break down those key concepts like what is a model, what's an alias, and all that technical jargon. So when you actually open up the documentation, it's not so overwhelming.
Okay, so let's get right to it. The heart of the OpenAI documentation seems to be all about their models. So what exactly are these models, and why are they so central?
You can think of models as like the brains behind the operation. They're the specialized AI agents, each kind of designed for a specific task. So you've got GPT models, for example.
Right. And GPT models are the ones that are known for being like really good at text, right? Like translation, creative writing, all that.
Exactly. They're fast, versatile, really good at handling just about anything you throw at them in terms of text.
Okay, so that's GPT. But then the documentation also mentions all sorts of other models, like reasoning models. What's the difference?
Ah, yes. So reasoning models, those are designed more for like logic and problem solving. So think complex math problems, writing code, that sort of thing. And what's really cool is they actually think through things step by step before giving you an answer.
Oh, wow. So it's like having like a mini Sherlock Holmes in your code.
Exactly. Makes them super good at those challenging tasks.
So if I need to process a lot of text, I might use a GPT model.
Yeah.
But if I need to solve like a complex logic problem, I'd go for a reasoning model.
You got it. It's all about choosing the right tool for the job, right? And then on top of that, you've got specialized models too, like DALL for generating images, Whisper for audio.
Wow, so it's like a whole team of AI specialists. Now, I've noticed in the OpenAI docs, you'll see model names like GPT-4o, but then also things like GPT-4o 2024-0806. What's the deal with those longer names?
Great question. So that shorter name, like GPT-4o, that's what we call an alias. It's like a nickname, points to a specific version of the model, a snapshot frozen in time.
Okay, so it's like a shorthand way of referring to a specific model.
Exactly. But, and here's the catch, those aliases, they can change over time. As OpenAI updates their models, those aliases might point to different versions.
Oh, I see. So if I'm using an alias in my code and OpenAI updates the model, I might not be getting the exact same version anymore.
Exactly. It's like you think you're ordering your favorite pizza, but they slightly change the recipe. You might get a surprise.
Ah, okay, I get it. That makes sense.
Yeah.
So that's why using the full dated snapshot ID, that's important for reproducibility in my projects.
100%. You're locking in that specific model version, so your code is going to behave consistently, even if OpenAI rolls out updates down the line.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. It's like version control for AI models. So speaking of specific models, let's talk about some of the ones I see mentioned a lot. GPT-4o and GPT-4o Mini.
Yes. So both of those, they're multimodal models, meaning they can handle both text and images. GPT-4o is the powerhouse, capable of really amazing feats. GPT-4o Mini, while not as powerful, it's lightning fast and incredibly cost-effective. So great for those quick tasks or if you're watching your budget.
So would you say that GPT-4o Mini is a good alternative to the popular GPT 3.5 Turbo?
Absolutely. In fact, the documentation actually suggests that. For many tasks, GPT-4o Mini can be a great swap. Similar level of performance, but lower cost and those faster response times.
Got it. Okay, so we've got these super versatile GPT models, but then there's this other category, the O1 models. What makes them different?
So the O1 models are designed specifically for reasoning tasks, and they use what we call a chain of thought approach, meaning they actually think through problems, like step by step, before arriving at a solution.
So instead of just spitting out an answer, they're actually explaining their reasoning.
Precisely. They break down the problem, consider different angles, and then they present their solution along with their thought process, which, makes them really good at complex math problems, science, even coding.
Wow. It's like having an AI that can show its work.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've covered a few different types of models and, why choosing the right one is important. But I have a feeling there's so much more to explore.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. We've just scratched the surface.
Hmm.
In the next part, we'll dive deeper into some key concepts like context windows and tokens. These are really important for understanding how much information these models can actually process.
Excellent. Stay tuned, listeners. We'll be right back after a short break.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the OpenAI documentation. All right, so we were just starting to talk about context windows before the break. What exactly are those and, why should we care?
Yeah, context windows. It sounds kind of technical.
It is a bit, but think of it like the model's short-term memory, right? It's the amount of information it can actually keep in mind while it's processing your request.
Yeah. Okay, so it's like we're giving the model a certain amount of text to work with.
Exactly. And we're talking about context windows that can handle up to 128,000 tokens for some models.
128,000 tokens?
Yeah.
What does that even mean? Like in practical terms?
Imagine feeding an entire short story or a huge chunk of code into one of these models. That's the kind of scale we're talking about.
Wow. Okay, so it's not just processing single sentences or commands. It's like understanding the bigger picture.
Exactly. And this is key, right? Because it means the models can keep track of what you're talking about, even over a longer period. So remembering previous instructions, following complex storylines, understanding those nuances of a conversation.
So it's like maintaining that sense of continuity like a human would in a conversation.
Precisely. Now, you might be wondering, what exactly are these tokens we keep mentioning? Well, they're basically chunks of words or even individual characters. When you feed text into an OpenAI model, it first breaks that text down into these tokens.
So tokens are like the basic building blocks of language that the model understands.
Exactly. And here's why this matters. The cost of using these models and the size of that context window, they're all measured in tokens. So the more tokens your text has, the more it might cost to process, and the more of that precious context window it's going to use up.
That makes sense. So if I'm working with, a limited budget or I need to feed the model a ton of information, I should be mindful of like how many tokens my text has.
Absolutely. Being efficient with your tokens is like a really good habit to get into, especially as you start working on more complex projects. Now, speaking of real-world projects, let's talk about, how do you actually use these models in your own Python code? Well, you're going to need what's called an API key.
An API key, what's that?
It's like your personal access pass to the OpenAI platform. Think of it as like a secret code that lets you use their services.
Okay, and where do I get one of those?
You can generate one directly from their website. It's super easy. But just a word of caution, treat it like a valuable password. Don't share it publicly and store it securely in your development environment.
Got it. Okay, so once I have my API key, how do I actually use it? Like in my Python code? Because, looking at the documentation, it can be a bit intimidating.
I hear you. But the good news is the OpenAI Python library makes it surprisingly straightforward. You can install it using pip, which is, the package installer for Python. And then once it's installed, you can basically use it to like send your prompts, receive the model's responses, essentially have a conversation with the AI.
So the library, it's like acting as a translator, allowing my Python code to talk to the OpenAI model.
Exactly. It handles all that like complex behind the scenes stuff, so you can just focus on what you want to do with the models.
That's a huge relief. Okay, so I've got my API key, I've installed the library, I'm ready to build something. Where do I even begin?
Well, the OpenAI documentation, that's truly your best friend here. It's got like clear instructions, code examples, even interactive tutorials. Don't be afraid to experiment. Just try things out.
Are there any specific tips you'd recommend for someone who's brand new to all this?
Yeah, for sure. Start with a simple project, something that, gets you excited. Could be building a chatbot, generating some creative writing prompts, even translating text. Starting small helps you build confidence and get a feel for how the models work.
That's good advice. I remember, when I first started learning Python, I was so overwhelmed. It's all about those small steps, celebrating those little victories. Now, we've talked about tokens, context windows, API keys, but there's one more thing I want to touch on, pricing.
Oh.
Because I've seen in the documentation, they mention different pricing tiers, and that can be a bit daunting.
Yeah, pricing is definitely something to keep in mind. Generally, the more powerful the model, the higher the cost. But the good news is OpenAI offers a free tier. It gives you, a certain amount of credit to experiment with, so you can play around with the models without spending any money up front.
Oh, that's fantastic. It's like a free trial so I can explore and see what's possible.
Exactly. It's a great way to like get your feet wet, see which models work for you. Okay, so we've covered a lot. Real-world applications, tokens, pricing, those all-important API keys. But before we wrap up, I want to touch on one more concept I've seen mentioned. Prompt engineering. What is that and why does it matter?
Yeah, prompt engineering, that's another one that sounds a little technical.
It is, but it's basically all about how you craft those instructions, those prompts that guide the model to like produce the output you want. Think of it as like speaking the model's language. The way you phrase your requests, it can really impact the quality of the response you get.
So it's not just what you ask, it's how you ask it.
Exactly. For instance, instead of just saying, write me some code to sort a list, you might say, write Python code to sort a list of numbers in ascending order using the bubble sort algorithm. Being clear, concise, and providing context, it helps the model give you exactly what you need.
It's like giving the model a detailed blueprint instead of just a vague sketch.
You got it. And as you get more experience working with these models, you'll become more adept at prompt engineering and really understanding how to like get those amazing results.
This has been so helpful. We've gone over a lot of important stuff, from the basics of models and context windows to API keys and pricing.
And we can't emphasize enough how the OpenAI documentation can really be your guide every step of the way.
But we're not done yet. In the final part of our deep dive, we'll wrap things up with some key takeaways and some actionable advice for our listeners, especially those of you who are, just starting out on your Python journey.
Stay tuned.
Welcome back to the deep dive. We've been on quite a journey exploring the ins and outs of the OpenAI documentation. And honestly, it's mind-blowing what these models can do, from generating text and images to tackling some seriously complex problems.
Yeah, it really makes you realize just how far AI has come and the potential it has. It's huge. But, I think it's important to remember you don't need to be a seasoned AI expert to actually use these tools.
Absolutely. The OpenAI documentation, while it is like super comprehensive, it's also designed to be accessible, even for someone who's, relatively new to Python.
And you don't have to memorize everything at once,
No.
right? That's the beauty of documentation. It's always there for you to reference.
It's like your trusty sidekick on this whole AI journey. So for our listeners who are ready to dive in and get started, what are some practical first steps they can take after this deep dive?
Well, first things first, head over to the OpenAI website, create a free account. That gives you access to the API, some free credits, so you can play around without any financial commitment.
It's like a playground for all these possibilities. I remember those interactive tutorials were really helpful when I was first starting out.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Those are a great way to get like hands-on experience without having to write a ton of code right away. And then, when you are ready to start coding, make sure you've installed that OpenAI Python library. It's your bridge to communicating with all these models.
And remember, start with a simple project. Something that, that gets you excited. A chatbot, creative writing prompts, maybe even translate some text. Start small. Build up your confidence.
Exactly. You don't have to build the next ChatGPT right out the gate. Those small victories, they lead to big accomplishments. And, if you hit any bumps along the way, remember, the OpenAI community is super helpful. Tons of forums and resources where you can ask questions.
It's like having a whole team of AI enthusiasts cheering you on.
Hmm.
So as you embark on your OpenAI adventures, what are some key takeaways you'd want listeners to remember?
I think the most important thing is to approach this with a sense of curiosity. Be willing to learn. Don't be afraid to try new things. And most importantly, be patient with yourself. Learning takes time. The more you practice, the more confident you'll become.
I love that. This deep dive has been an incredible journey, and I really hope it's left our listeners feeling empowered to, explore the world of OpenAI
Yeah.
with confidence, with excitement, because the future of AI, it's being shaped right now, and
Well,
you can be a part of it.
absolutely. So go out there, explore, create. Who knows? You might build something truly amazing.
Happy coding, everyone. All right, Python explorers, welcome back. Today's deep dive is for anyone about 3 months into their Python journey and ready to tackle the OpenAI universe. I know those docs can seem like a bit of a jungle, so before you even click that link, we're going to equip you with like a mental map and a compass.
Think of it this way. We're going to break down the key concepts and decode the lingo and just sketch out the architecture of OpenAI. All in plain English, of course. No jargon safaris today.
Exactly. We're going for clear, practical understanding here. So by the end of this deep dive, you'll be able to open those docs and feel confident, not confused, ready to unlock some serious AI power with Python.
Absolutely. And to understand where OpenAI is going, a good place to start is by looking at where they've been. Their changelog is actually a fascinating time machine.
The changelog. Okay, I'm intrigued. How does a list of updates act like a time machine?
Well, it's not just a list. It's a reverse timeline that reveals how OpenAI's features, priorities, even their overall vision have evolved. Think of it as a behind-the-scenes look at their development process.
I'm starting to see how this could be useful. What kind of insights should a Python beginner be looking for in this changelog?
Two key milestones stand out. First, the rise of the GPT models. In February 2025, they released GPT 4.5. And what's really interesting for someone building applications is its focus on EQ.
I remember that announcement. But how does a model having EQ translate into something I can actually do with Python?
It's about building applications that can understand intent and nuances. GPT 4.5 is designed to go beyond just understanding the words you type. It can grasp the context of your goals and even anticipate what you might need next.
So if I'm building, say, a chatbot, it could make the interaction much more natural and intuitive.
Precisely. It's about creating a more human-like experience. The second key milestone is the emergence of specialized models like O3 Mini, which they released in January 2025. This one is optimized for science, math, and coding tasks.
Now that's interesting. Why create specialized models? Wouldn't one super powerful model be enough to handle everything?
It reflects a shift towards a more modular, purpose-built approach. Instead of a one-size-fits-all model, OpenAI is developing specialized tools for specific jobs.
Okay, I see the logic there. It's like having a toolbox with different tools for different tasks, instead of one giant multi-tool that tries to do everything.
That's a great analogy. And as you explore the documentation, you'll see how this specialization plays out in the different APIs and models available.
All right, so we've got these powerful GPT models and a growing collection of specialized tools, but how do we actually start using them?
Right.
That's where the OpenAI documentation comes in, right?
Exactly. And don't worry, we're going to guide you through it step by step so you can navigate it with confidence.
All right, so we've got our mental map from the changelog. Now let's talk about actually navigating the documentation itself. Where do we even begin?
The first landmark you'll encounter is APIs. They're the bridges that connect your Python code to OpenAI's powerful models.
Okay, APIs. I've heard the term, but to be honest, it's still a bit fuzzy for me.
Think of an API as a set of rules and specifications that define how different software components can talk to each other. In this case, it's how your Python code can send requests to OpenAI and receive responses back.
So it's like a communication protocol specifically designed for interacting with OpenAI services.
Exactly. And as a Python beginner, there are three key APIs you'll want to focus on. First, there's the completions API. This one is your go-to for generating text. Whether you want to write a poem or draft an email or even generate code, the completions API is what you'll use.
That sounds incredibly versatile. What about building chatbots? Is there a specific API for that?
You bet. It's called the Chat Completions API. It's specifically designed for building conversational AI experiences, whether it's a customer service bot or a virtual assistant or even just a fun chatbot to chat with.
Got it. Completions for general text and chat completions for those interactive chatbot scenarios. What's the third API I should know about?
The third one is embeddings, and this is where things get a bit more interesting. Embeddings allow you to represent text as numerical vectors, capturing the meaning and relationships between words and phrases.
Okay, hold on. Numerical vectors. Can you break that down a bit more for those of us who aren't math whizzes?
Sure. Imagine you're comparing movie plot summaries. Embeddings can convert those summaries into numerical representations, allowing you to see how similar or different those movies are based on their plots.
So it's like a way to quantify the meaning of text and compare different pieces of text based on their semantic content.
Precisely. And this has tons of applications. You can use it to build recommendation systems, cluster similar documents, or even power search engines that understand the intent behind your queries.
Wow, that opens up a whole new world of possibilities. All right, so we've covered the three essential APIs: completions, chat completions, and embeddings. What else do we need to know about as we explore the OpenAI documentation?
The next key piece of the puzzle is understanding the models themselves. Remember how we talked about the changelog revealing a trend toward specialized models?
Yes, like O3 Mini for science and coding tasks.
Exactly. Each model has its own strengths and is designed for specific types of tasks. As you navigate the documentation, you'll find detailed descriptions of each model and its capabilities.
So it's important to choose the right model for the job, just like you'd choose the right tool from a toolbox.
Absolutely. Now, don't get bogged down by the model version numbers. You'll see like GPT-3.5, Turbo 0125. Just remember that newer versions generally bring improvements and new features.
Got it. Focus on the model's capabilities and don't sweat the specific version numbers too much. So we've got APIs for communication and models as the brains of the operation. But where does Python actually come into play?
That's where the Python SDK comes in. Think of it as your translator and toolkit for working with OpenAI in Python.
SDK.
Yeah.
Right? Software Development Kit. I remember that from our first deep dive.
Exactly. OpenAI provides a dedicated Python SDK that makes it incredibly easy to integrate their APIs into your Python projects. It provides pre-built functions and classes that handle the complexities of communicating with the APIs so you can focus on building your application.
So instead of writing all the code from scratch to send requests and handle responses, I can use these pre-built tools in the SDK.
Precisely. It simplifies the entire development process. Let me give you an example. Let's say you want to use the completions API to generate text. With the Python SDK, you can do that in just a few lines of code. You would import the OpenAI library, set up your API key for authentication, and then simply call a function to send your request to the API. The SDK handles all the underlying details for you.
Wow, that sounds much less intimidating than I imagined. So the SDK takes care of all the heavy lifting, allowing me to focus on the logic and functionality of my Python application.
Exactly. And this brings us to one of the most important aspects of learning OpenAI. Don't be afraid to dive in and experiment.
Experiment. But what if I mess things up?
That's part of the learning process. And luckily, OpenAI provides a fantastic tool for safe experimentation: the playground.
The playground. Tell me more.
It's a web-based interactive environment where you can test out different APIs, experiment with various models, and see the results in real time, all without writing a single line of code.
That sounds amazing. So I can play around with different prompts, see how the models respond, and get a feel for how everything works before I start integrating it into my Python code.
Exactly. The playground is your sandbox for exploring OpenAI's capabilities. You can tweak parameters, try different models, and see how your inputs affect the outputs. It's a fantastic way to learn by doing.
I'm definitely going to be spending some time in the playground. Okay, so we've covered APIs, models, the Python SDK, and the playground. What other tips do you have for navigating the documentation and actually making sense of it all?
Here's a pro tip. Don't be afraid to lean on the OpenAI community. There are forums, online communities, and countless resources where you can ask questions, get help, and learn from other developers who are on the same journey.
That's reassuring to know. It's like having a support system as I venture into this new territory. So to recap, we have the APIs as our communication channels, the models as the brains behind the operation, the Python SDK is our trusty toolkit, and the playground is our sandbox for experimentation. And if we get stuck, the OpenAI community is there to help us out.
You got it. And with that foundation, you're ready to unlock the power of OpenAI and start building some amazing Python applications.
This has been incredibly helpful. I feel much more confident about tackling those OpenAI docs now.
Uh,
What's next on our OpenAI adventure?
all right, so we've journeyed through the OpenAI changelog and demystified APIs and explored the world of models and even discovered the magic of the Python SDK and the playground. I'm feeling pretty empowered to dive into those docs now.
That's fantastic to hear you've gone from feeling a bit intimidated to having a solid grasp of the fundamentals. And remember, the real learning begins when you start putting this knowledge into practice. Absolutely. I'm a firm believer in learning by doing so as a Python beginner who's now armed with this OpenAI knowledge. What kind of projects could I realistically tackle?
Well, the possibilities are vast, even with just a few months of Python experience. The key is to start with a project that excites you, something that aligns with your interests.
That makes sense. I wouldn't want to get bogged down in a project that feels like a chore. I need that spark of inspiration to keep me going. Speaking of inspiration, I've been toying with the idea of building a chatbot that helps people learn new languages.
That's a fantastic idea. With OpenAI's Chat Completions API and the advancements in natural language processing, you could create a personalized AI tutor that adapts to each user's learning style and provides real-time feedback.
Exactly. It's like having a language partner available 24/7. Or maybe I could build a tool that analyzes news articles from different sources and helps users identify various perspectives on a topic.
That's another great application. Using embeddings, you could compare the semantic content of articles from different publications and cluster them based on their viewpoints. It could help people break out of their filter bubbles and see the bigger picture.
I love that it's all about empowering users with information and diverse perspectives. And who knows, maybe down the line I could even explore image or audio generation. Imagine creating AI-powered tools that can generate artwork from text descriptions or compose music based on your mood.
The possibilities are truly endless, and the beauty of it is that you don't need to be an expert to start exploring these possibilities. With the knowledge you've gained and the resources available, you can jump right in and start experimenting.
It's pretty inspiring, actually. So to all our listeners out there, especially those who are just starting their Python journey, remember that the world of OpenAI is at your fingertips. Don't be intimidated by the documentation. Embrace it as your guidebook to a world of creative possibilities.
And remember, learning to code, especially in the realm of AI, is a journey, not a destination. Embrace the challenges, celebrate the small wins, and never stop exploring.
That's a wrap on another deep dive. We hope you're feeling energized and ready to unlock your AI potential with Python. Until next time, keep coding, keep learning, and keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible. All right, get ready, because today we're going to jump right into the OpenAI documentation, specifically for text generation.
Ooh, exciting.
It is. It's like, before you fly a plane, you do all the pre-flight checks. This is kind of like the pre-flight check for piloting some serious AI power.
I like that analogy. So we're getting ready to fly.
Yeah, we're getting ready to fly. And we know you're, a Python beginner. You've got about 3 months of experience under your belt.
All right.
So you're ready to make OpenAI sing, right?
Let's do it.
So to help you do that, we're going to use excerpts from this source 5. Text Generation OpenAI API, just to kind of create that mental roadmap, highlighting, the stuff you really got to know without getting lost in all the technical details.
Yeah, we don't want to get bogged down. We want to make sure you can actually use it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like we're giving you the cheat codes to navigate the documentation with confidence.
Cheat codes, I like it.
And trust me, there are some really cool insights in here.
Ooh, I'm intrigued. Like what?
Well, we're going to be talking about this thing called prompt engineering. Basically, it's the art of speaking AI.
Yeah.
Right? And the fact that OpenAI isn't just one thing. You get to choose the AI brain that you work with.
Oh, interesting. So there are options.
There are options. Each one's got its own strengths and, importantly, its own cost. And get this, you can even fine-tune these models to make them sound like a Southern belle, if that's your thing.
Wow, a Southern Belle AI. That's a pretty good illustration of how you can customize the personality of these AI models.
It is.
But before we go too far down that road, let's start with the foundation. How does OpenAI actually generate text?
Okay, so you've probably played with ChatGPT, right?
Oh, yeah.
It's kind of like the rock star of OpenAI.
It's the one everyone's talking about.
Yeah, it's super popular. Well, under the hood, both ChatGPT and the text generation API rely on these things called large language models.
Okay, large language models. What are those exactly?
So think of these models as like super brains that have been trained on a gigantic amount of data.
So they've been fed, like, a ton of information.
A ton. They can understand your instructions, even if they're just written in plain English, and then generate different kinds of outputs,
Yep.
based on what you ask.
Interesting. So I can just talk to them like a normal person.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And it's not just limited to text either. They can also generate code, equations, even JSON, like you name it, they can probably do it.
Hold on, Jason. That sounds a little intimidating. Is that something a Python beginner needs to worry about?
I had the same thought. Like, I'm still grappling with Python lists and dictionaries.
Yeah, exactly.
So is JSON going to trip us up here?
Not at all. Imagine JSON as just like this universal language for organizing information.
Okay.
It's just data formatted in a specific way that both humans and machines can understand.
So it's how they talk to each other.
Kind of like that, yeah.
Yeah.
And the beauty of the OpenAI API is that it can handle all sorts of tasks, regardless of where you're at in your Python journey.
Okay, so I don't need to be a JSON expert to use this. That's a relief. So the source mentions two main ways to interact with these language models, the REST API and OpenAI's SDKs. Can you break that down for someone who's, not exactly a tech wizard?
So think of an API like it's a messenger. It lets your code talk to OpenAI servers. It's kind of like sending a letter with instructions on what you want the AI to do. Now, NDKs, on the other hand, are like these prepackaged toolkits that make sending those instructions way easier. So instead of you having to write everything from scratch, you get pre-built functions and tools specifically for Python, since that's the language you're using.
Okay, so the API is the messenger, the SDK is the toolkit.
You got it.
Got it. But OpenAI offers a bunch of different models, like we said. How do I choose the right brain for the job?
Right. So that's where model selection comes in. It's just like choosing the right tool from your toolbox. I mean, the hammer is great for nails, but not so much for screws, right?
Right.
So each OpenAI model, just like tools, has its own strengths and weaknesses, and importantly, its own cost. So you need to consider what you're trying to achieve and what your budget is.
So how do I figure out which model is like the Goldilocks fit for me?
Well, the source mentions this thing called the playground.
Okay.
It's kind of like a risk-free sandbox where you can experiment with different models, tweak your prompts, and see what kind of outputs you get. You can play around without having to worry about breaking anything or racking up charges.
Oh, I like that. A risk-free environment.
Yeah, exactly. It's a great place to learn.
So what kind of models are we talking about here? What are the options?
Well, the source highlights three main categories. First, you've got your large models like GPT-4o.
Okay.
Think of these as like the heavy hitters, incredibly intelligent, capable of generating super high quality output, but they also come with a higher cost per token.
Hold up, tokens? What are those exactly? I'm not familiar with that term.
So imagine tokens are like the currency in the AI world. They're essentially pieces of words that the model uses to process and generate text. So a short word like cat might be 1 token, while a longer word like extraordinary could be 3 or 4 tokens. And understanding tokens is super important because they determine how much your AI interactions are going to cost. And they also help you stay within the limits of each model.
Okay, that makes sense. So we've got the large models, but what are the other options?
Then you've got smaller models like GP4o Mini. Think of these as the sprinters. They might not be as powerful as the large models, but they're faster and they're cheaper to run.
Okay, so faster and cheaper. Got it.
Exactly. And finally, you've got the reasoning models, like the O1 family. These are the deep thinkers. They're slower and more methodical, but they're really good at tackling those complex tasks that require a little more brain power.
Okay, so I've picked my model. I'm in the playground. Now what? How do I actually communicate with this AI and get it to do what I want?
That's where the magic of prompt engineering comes in. It's all about crafting effective prompts, essentially giving the AI clear instructions to get the output that you desire.
So it's kind of like you're giving directions to a genie.
Yeah, like a very literal but extremely powerful genie. It's not just what you say, but how you say it.
Interesting. So the source mentions providing clear instructions, examples, and context. Can you give me like a concrete example of what that looks like?
Okay, sure. Imagine you're asking the AI to translate a piece of text into Spanish. A basic prompt might be translate this text and then followed by the text you want translated.
Right. Simple enough.
But a more effective prompt might be translate the following English text into Spanish, ensuring the tone is formal and using vocabulary appropriate for a business context. And then you'd provide the text.
Okay, so it's like I'm painting a clear picture for the AI, giving it all the information it needs to understand exactly what I want.
Exactly. And this context can even include information that the AI might not have in its, vast training data.
Yeah.
You're essentially guiding the AI to become an expert in your specific domain.
That's really cool. But how do we structure these prompts in a way that the AI actually understands? The source mentions these things called messages and roles. What's that all about?
So think of it like a play with different characters.
Okay.
The Chat Completions API is like the stage where you interact with the AI. You provide an array of messages, each with a specific role that guides the AI's interpretation.
Okay, break down these roles for me. Who are the players in this AI drama?
Right, so you have the user role, which is you, the human, giving the instructions, just like you would in ChatGPT.
Okay.
Then there's the developer role. This is where you provide high-level instructions on how you want the model to behave. Think of it as like setting the personality or the tone for the AI.
Okay.
And finally, you have the assistant role. This represents messages generated by the AI in previous turns of the conversation.
So it's like a back and forth dialogue, a conversation with the AI.
Exactly. And this developer role is where things get really interesting. You can get creative and really fine-tune how you want the AI to respond. The source even gives an example of instructing the AI to answer like a Southern belle.
Now that's what I call adding some personality to the mix. But is it really that simple? Can I just tell the AI to adopt any persona I want?
It's a powerful tool, but you have to remember that these models are trained on massive amounts of data, and that data reflects the biases and limitations of the real world.
Oh, right. So even though it's AI, it's still pulling from real-world information.
Exactly. So while you can experiment with different personalities, it's important to be mindful of the potential impact of those choices.
That's a really good point. It's easy to get caught up in the coolness factor and forget that there are real-world implications to how we use these tools.
Yeah.
But going back to this conversation idea, it sounds like we're not just sending commands, we're actually having a back-and-forth exchange with the AI. Can you elaborate on that a little bit more?
Absolutely. The ability to maintain context and carry on a multi-turn conversation is one of the things that makes these language models so powerful and versatile.
So it's not just about individual prompts, it's about building a relationship with the AI over multiple interactions.
Exactly. And that's just scratching the surface. We can even go a step further and provide the AI with additional information like database results or text documents to make its responses even more relevant and insightful. And that's where a technique called retrieval augmented generation, or RAG, comes into play.
RAG. Okay, now you've got my attention. This sounds like we're turning the AI into a research assistant.
Right. With RAG, you're basically giving the AI access to a personalized knowledge base. You're helping it understand the specific context of your requests and generate more accurate and relevant responses.
This is getting really exciting. We're moving beyond simple question and answer interactions and stepping into a world where the AI can actually understand and respond to complex requests based on a deeper understanding of the subject matter.
Precisely. And all of this is achieved through, carefully crafted prompts and a deeper understanding of how these language models work.
All right, before we get too carried away with our Southern Belle AI assistant composing Shakespearean sonnets, we need to talk about practicalities.
Okay, yeah, let's get practical.
The source mentions token limits and context windows. These sound a bit more technical. Can you break them down for me?
Of course. Remember how we talked about tokens being the currency of the AI world? Well, each model has a limited budget of tokens that it can handle, both for input and output. And the context window refers to the total number of tokens that the model can consider at once, including your prompt and the generated response.
So it's like an attention span for the AI.
You could say that. And just like humans, AIs have their limits. If you try to cram too much information into a single prompt or conversation, you risk exceeding that limit, and then the output might get cut off mid-sentence.
So we need to be mindful of how much we're asking the AI to process at once. But how do I know how many tokens my prompts and responses are using?
That's where a tool called the tokenizer comes in handy. It allows you to analyze your text and estimate the token count. This will help you stay within the model's limits and avoid those unexpected costs.
So we're juggling tokens, watching our context window, and crafting the perfect prompts. It sounds like there's a lot to consider to get the most out of these AI models. What else do I need to keep in mind?
Well, and that's where optimization comes into play. It's all about fine-tuning your interactions with the AI, to achieve the best results.
Optimization sounds like something race car drivers do to get that extra little bit of speed.
Hmm.
How does that apply to working with AI?
Well, you're not far off. In the world of AI, optimization is all about finding the perfect balance between three key factors: accuracy, cost, and latency.
Okay, let's break those optimization goals down a little bit. Accuracy seems pretty straightforward. I
Mhm.
want the AI to give me the right answers. What are some techniques for improving accuracy?
Well, we've already talked about prompt engineering, right?
Yeah.
Which is crucial for, guiding the AI towards those accurate responses.
Mm.
But there are other techniques like R, which we discussed earlier, and something called model fine-tuning.
Yeah.
With fine-tuning, you're essentially training the AI on a very specific data set to make it even better at handling tasks within a particular domain.
So it's like sending your AI to a specialized training camp,
Yeah.
to become an expert in a specific field.
Exactly.
Got it. So what about cost optimization? I'm guessing token count plays a role
Oh,
here.
you bet. Tokens are like the fuel for our AI engine. The more tokens we use, the more it costs. So how do we keep those costs under control?
Right.
Well, one way is to be mindful of the model you choose. Remember, larger models are more powerful, but also more expensive to run.
Right.
So if you don't need the raw power of a large model, opting for a smaller, more cost-effective model can make a huge difference.
That makes perfect sense. And lastly, how do we optimize for latency? I'm assuming that means making the AI respond faster.
You got it. Latency is all about speed. Nobody wants to be waiting around for the AI to, churn its gears.
Right. So how do we give our AI a need for speed?
Well, prompt engineering is key here as well. Make sure your instructions are clear, concise, and to the point. Avoid any ambiguity and give the AI everything it needs to process your request quickly. There are also techniques like using parallelism in your code, which essentially means running multiple processes at the same time to speed things up.
That sounds a bit more technical, but I'm following along. It seems like we're constantly trying to find that sweet spot, right? Between accuracy, cost, and speed. Are there any other factors we need to consider when working with these language models?
Well, we've talked about single-turn interactions where you send a prompt and the AI gives you a response, but one of the really powerful features of these models is their ability to engage in multi-turn conversations. It's like having an actual chat with the AI, not just a one-off exchange.
Oh, that sounds like a game changer. But how does that work in practice? Does the AI actually remember what we've talked about previously?
It does. The source uses the classic knock-knock joke as an example to illustrate this.
Mm.
Imagine you send the AI a message saying, knock, knock. The AI, playing along, responds with, who's there? You then send orange. The AI, continuing the game, says, orange who?
Okay, I see where this is going. We're building up a conversation like a chain of messages back and forth.
Exactly. And by providing the AI with all the previous messages in the prompt, you're essentially simulating that back and forth exchange. The AI keeps track of the conversation history and uses that context to generate its responses.
So it's not just about individual prompts, it's about the entire flow of the conversation.
Precisely. This ability to maintain context over multiple turns, it opens up a whole world of possibilities. Think about building an AI-powered chatbot that can remember previous interactions, and provide personalized responses. Or imagine creating an interactive story where the AI actually adapts the narrative based on the choices you make.
That's amazing. This is all incredibly exciting. But I can't help but wonder, is there a limit to how much context the AI can retain? We've already talked about token limits and context windows.
Yeah, you raise a really valid point. While these models are incredibly capable, they do have their limitations. The context window, as we discussed earlier, determines the maximum number of tokens the AI can process at once.
So if we try to cram in too much information, we risk exceeding that limit.
That's right. The output might get truncated, meaning it just cuts off abruptly, or the AI might lose track of the conversation flow. It's like trying to read a book with only a few pages visible at a time.
Okay, so we need to be strategic about how we manage this context. How do we make sure the AI has enough information to understand us, without overloading its memory?
Well, that's where those optimization techniques we discussed earlier come in handy. For accuracy, it's crucial to provide the AI with just the right amount of context. Not too much, not too little.
Yep.
Too much can overwhelm the model, while too little can lead to, irrelevant responses.
So it's about finding the Goldilocks zone of context.
Exactly. And then, of course, there's the cost factor. Remember, each token comes with a price tag.
Right.
The more context you include, the more tokens you consume, and that can impact your budget.
Makes sense. We need to be mindful of our token budget, especially in those lengthy conversations. What about latency? Does context management affect how quickly the AI responds?
Absolutely. The more context the AI needs to process, the longer it takes to generate a response. There are techniques to address this. You can try summarizing previous turns or use a sliding window approach where you're only feeding the AI the most recent parts of the conversation.
So there are ways to streamline it a bit.
Exactly.
It seems like there's a delicate balancing act involved in managing context effectively. It's about finding that sweet spot between providing enough information for accuracy without sacrificing speed or blowing the budget.
You nailed it. And that's where the skill of a prompt engineer really shines.
Okay, so we've covered the basics of text generation, choosing the right model, the art of prompt engineering, how to have a conversation with the AI, and even how to manage context effectively. What else is there to know about working with the OpenAI API?
Well, we focus mostly on generating text in natural language, like English or Spanish.
Right.
But the API can also be used to generate structured data, like JSON.
JSON again. I thought we were past that. But I guess it makes sense. If these AI models can generate all sorts of text, why not structure it in a way that's easily machine readable?
Precisely. JSON is like a universal language that computers can understand.
Okay.
Imagine using an AI model to generate data for your Python application or even, create those complex configuration files automatically.
Now, that's a time saver. But how do we ensure that the AI generates JSON data that's actually valid and conforms to, the specific structure we need?
That's where JSON schema comes into play. It's like a blueprint that defines the structure and rules for your JSON data. You can provide the AI with a JSON schema, and it'll use that as a guide to generate properly formatted data.
So we can tell the AI, hey, generate some JSON, but make sure it follows these specific guidelines.
Exactly. And the source material actually provides, some resources for diving deeper into this topic, which I highly recommend exploring if you're working with structured data.
It's incredible to think that we can use AI to generate not just text, but structured data that can directly integrate with our applications and workflows.
This is just one example of the many, advanced capabilities these language models offer. There's a whole world of possibilities waiting to be explored.
I'm definitely sensing a recurring theme here. Explore, experiment, and push the boundaries. That seems to be the mantra for anyone venturing into the world of OpenAI.
Absolutely. The more you explore, the more you'll uncover, the incredible potential of these technologies.
All right, before we send our listeners off to embark on their own AI adventures, let's take a step back and recap the key takeaways from our deep dive into the OpenAI documentation so far.
Sounds like a great idea. Let's consolidate what we've learned.
Okay, we started with the fundamental concept of text generation, where we learned how OpenAI uses those large language models to process prompts and generate a variety of outputs, right? Not just natural language, but also code, equations, and even structured data like JSON.
Right. And we talked about the importance of model selection, highlighting the different types of models available. Large, small, and reasoning models, each with its own, strengths, weaknesses, and those cost implications.
And of course, we couldn't forget about the art of prompt engineering.
Right.
Where we learn the importance of clear instructions, relevant examples, and providing enough context to guide the AI toward generating those desired results.
And we uncovered the power of those multi-turn conversations, enabling us to have those dynamic interactions with the AI where it remembers those previous interactions and maintains that context throughout the exchange.
But we didn't shy away from the practical considerations either. We discussed the importance of understanding tokens, managing the context window effectively, and utilizing those optimization techniques to balance accuracy, cost, and latency.
Absolutely. And to top it all off, we even touched upon the ability to generate that structured data like JSON, opening up a whole new realm of possibilities for those, wanting to integrate AI into their applications and workflows.
This has been an incredibly insightful journey. We've
Yeah.
gone from understanding the basic building blocks of text generation to exploring those more nuanced aspects of interacting with these, powerful language models.
Hmm.
I'm already feeling a lot more confident about diving into the OpenAI documentation and starting to build my own AI-powered applications.
That's fantastic to hear. And remember, this is just the beginning.
Exactly. The real learning happens when you start experimenting, applying these concepts, and maybe even pushing the boundaries of what's possible with these amazing tools.
Speaking of pushing boundaries, the source material points us towards some additional resources that can help you on your journey. There are, prompt examples, the playground, a cookbook full of real-world use cases, and even more information about generating JSON data with structured outputs.
Okay, now you're talking my language. Those sound like valuable resources for anyone who wants to take your OpenAI skills to the next level.
They are, and we'll dive into those resources in more detail in the final part of our deep dive.
Sounds like a plan. We'll be right back after a short break to explore those resources and uncover even more insights into the world of OpenAI. All right, we're back and ready to dig into these additional resources that the 5 text generation OpenAI API doc pointed us towards.
Yeah, these are like the bonus levels in your OpenAI adventure.
I like it. Bonus levels.
They offer some really practical guidance and real-world examples to help you, apply everything we've talked about so far.
Awesome. So first up, we've got prompt examples.
Hmm.
Seems pretty straightforward, but why are these so valuable for someone just starting out with OpenAI?
Well, imagine having this collection of, expertly crafted prompts just ready to be adapted for your own use cases.
It's like having a cheat sheet for talking to the AI.
Exactly. And it's not just about, seeing what works, but also understanding the underlying principles behind those effective prompts. You can, study these examples, dissect them, figure out what makes them tick.
So I can learn from the masters and apply those techniques to my own projects.
Precisely. Next on our list is the playground. We touched on this a little earlier, but it's worth revisiting because it's such a valuable tool for learning.
I remember you describing it as a risk-free sandbox.
Mm.
What makes it so special for someone like me who's still, getting their feet wet with AI?
Well, the playground allows you to experiment with different models, tweak your prompts, and see the results in real time, all without incurring any costs or worrying about breaking anything.
So I can practice my takeoffs and landings before, flying solo in the real world.
Exactly. And the best part is, the playground provides instant feedback. You see how different prompts affect the output, which helps you understand those nuances of prompt engineering and fine-tune your skills.
Okay, so that's prompt examples and the playground. What about the, I'm guessing, main course in this AI feast, the cookbook? What's on the menu there?
So the cookbook is where things get really interesting. It offers a collection of, more complex real-world examples that go beyond those basic concepts that we've covered so far.
It's like leveling up from making scrambled eggs to crafting a gourmet meal.
That's a great analogy. The cookbook shows you how to apply OpenAI to solve, specific problems. You'll find examples of building chatbots, translating languages, writing different kinds of creative content, answering your questions in an informative way, even creating interactive stories.
Wow, this cookbook is making me hungry.
Right.
Okay, before we wrap up, I have to ask about structured outputs one more time. This whole idea of generating JSON data with AI still feels a bit, I don't know, mysterious to me.
It might seem complex at first, but it's really about, expanding those possibilities of what you can do with AI. Instead of just generating text for humans to read, you can generate structured data that can be directly used by machines. Okay. So it's like baking a cake and then neatly packaging it for delivery.
Exactly. Structured outputs allow you to seamlessly integrate the AI's responses into your Python applications, databases, or any other system that relies on structured data.
And to ensure that this data cake is baked to perfection, we have JSON schema, right? It's like the recipe that guarantees the output meets my specific requirement.
Absolutely. JSON schema acts as a blueprint, defining the structure and rules for your JSON data. This ensures that the AI generates data that is valid and usable in your specific context.
It's incredible to think that we can use AI not just for generating text, but also to create structured data that can power our applications and workflows.
And the resources we've discussed today, the prompt examples, the playground, the cookbook, and the information on structured outputs, I mean, they provide the guidance and inspiration you need to unlock those possibilities.
It's like we've gone from feeling lost in a dense forest to having a clear map and a compass to guide us. I feel a lot more confident about diving into the OpenAI documentation now. And remember, the real adventure begins when you start exploring on your own. Don't be afraid to experiment, push those boundaries, see what amazing things you can create with OpenAI.
Well, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive. We've covered a lot of ground, from understanding the fundamentals of text generation to exploring those advanced concepts like multi-turn conversations and generating structured data.
Yeah, it's been a great journey.
I think it's safe to say our mission is accomplished. We've demystified the OpenAI documentation, provided some practical insights, and hopefully sparked some inspiration for our listeners to start creating their own AI-powered applications.
So go forth and build amazing things. And remember, if you ever get stuck or need some guidance, those resources we discussed are always there to help you along the way.
That's it for this episode. We'll catch you next time on the Deep Dive. Happy coding. All right, Python adventures, ready for today's deep dive. We're tackling the OpenAI documentation, specifically their vision capabilities. It's basically giving your Python code eyes. Pretty cool, right?
Yeah.
And don't worry, this one's tailored for those of you about 3 months into your Python journey. So if you're feeling a little intimidated by the thought of those dense docs, you're in the right place.
That's right. Think of it as building a mental roadmap before we even open up those docs.
Exactly. We're going for clarity and confidence here, not confusion. And to help us navigate this exciting world of image understanding, we've got our expert guide with us, ready to break down those technical terms and the architecture in a way that clicks.
I'm happy to be here. Think of this deep dive as like your pre-documentation prep. By the end, you'll be able to approach those OpenAI docs with a solid understanding of how to use these vision capabilities, even if you're just starting out with Python.
Okay, love that. But before we get lost in specifics like image URLs and base64 encoding, let's take a step back.
Yeah.
What does it even mean for OpenAI to have vision capabilities? What's the big picture?
It's a huge shift in how we interact with AI. For a long time, OpenAI models were primarily text-based, right? You feed them text, they generate text. But now with these vision capabilities, we're adding a whole new dimension. We're giving these models the ability to see and understand images, just like we do.
So it's not just analyzing text within images, like OCR. It's about actually understanding the content of an image, like recognizing objects, scenes, relationships.
Exactly. It's moving beyond simple text extraction and into true image understanding. Think about the possibilities. Analyzing medical images for early disease detection, creating interactive educational tools that respond to visual input, or even developing systems that can describe the world around us, for visually impaired individuals.
Wow. Okay, that's some seriously powerful stuff. So OpenAI can see now, but which specific models actually have this capability?
Right now, models like GPT-4, GPT-4 Turbo, those are leading the charge. They're the ones that have been specifically enhanced with this vision processing.
Okay, got it. Those are the big players. But for us Python beginners, how do we actually start working with images and these models? How do we bridge that gap between our code and the visual world?
Well, that's where the OpenAI API comes in. It provides a way for your Python code to communicate with these models and send them images for processing.
Okay, so API is like the messenger, carrying our requests and images over to these models.
Exactly. And there are a couple ways to actually feed images to these models. The most straightforward way is using an image URL. If you've got an image hosted online, you simply provide the model with the link, and it'll fetch it from there.
Okay, so if I want the model to analyze a picture of my cat that I have on my blog, I just give it the URL of that image and it knows where to find it.
Exactly. Simple and efficient, especially for images already online. But what about images that aren't online? What if you have an image stored locally on your computer?
Right. What then?
That's where base64 encoding comes in. It's a way to represent image data as text, which can then be included directly in your code. Think of it as translating the image into a language the model can understand.
So we're converting the image into a special text format that the model can then, decode and process.
Exactly. And I know base64 encoding might sound a bit intimidating, especially if you're new to Python. But trust me, it's not as complicated as it sounds. There are libraries and functions in Python that can handle this for you.
Oh, good to know. So we've got our images ready, whether it's through a URL or base64 encoding. But how does the model actually process these images? Does it break them down into pixels and analyze each one individually?
It's actually a bit more sophisticated than that. These models use deep learning, specifically convolutional neural networks, to analyze the images. They learn to identify patterns and features by processing, tons of training data.
Okay. Convolutional neural networks, that sounds pretty complex. What's the simplest way to think about that?
Imagine a detective looking for clues at a crime scene. Instead of looking at every single object in detail, they first scan the scene for patterns, relationships, anything that stands out, right? Convolutional neural networks do something similar with images. They don't analyze each pixel in isolation, but they look for patterns and features that help them understand the whole image.
So the model is like learning to see the forest, not just the trees.
Exactly. Now, once the model has processed the image, it can do some pretty amazing things. It can identify objects, describe scenes, answer questions about the image, even compare multiple images to find similarities or differences.
Okay, so we're giving our Python code a set of eyes that can not only see, but also interpret and analyze what they see. That's pretty mind-blowing. But how about the practical stuff? How do we actually write the code to interact with these models, send them images? I know we're aiming for beginners here, but can we get a sneak peek at what the code might look like?
Absolutely. The basic structure involves importing the OpenAI library, creating a client object to interact with the API, and then using the client.chat.completions.create function to send your request. Within that request, you'll specify the model you want to use and build a message that includes, your image information, either as that URL or a base64 encoded string.
Okay, so client.chat.completions.create sounds like the key function here. This is where we tell the model what we want it to do with the image.
Exactly. And within that message, you've got the flexibility to provide additional context or, instructions to the model. Like you could say, describe the scene in this image or identify the objects in this image.
So it's not just about feeding the model an image and hoping for the best. We can actually guide its analysis, asking questions, giving it clear instructions.
It's like having a conversation with the model, using images as a starting point.
I like that. Makes the whole process feel more interactive, less like throwing data at a black box.
Right. It's about understanding and control. You're not just blindly using a tool. You're actively guiding it and shaping the output.
This is really starting to come together. We're giving our code the power to see, understand, and even have a conversation about images. But before we get too carried away with all these possibilities, let's do a little reality check. What are the limitations of these vision models? They can't be perfect, right?
You're absolutely right. As impressive as these models are, they do have their limitations. For example, they might struggle with tasks that require really detailed spatial reasoning or understanding complex relationships between objects. They're also not immune to biases that might be present in the data they were trained on.
Okay, so being aware of those limitations, not expecting them to be flawless, that's important.
Exactly. It's about understanding the strengths and weaknesses of the technology and using it responsibly.
Makes sense. I think it also highlights the importance of continuing to explore and develop these models, pushing the boundaries, addressing those limitations.
Absolutely, yeah. This is a rapidly evolving field. We can definitely expect even more impressive capabilities in the future.
Okay, so we've got the big picture. OpenAI models can now see, and we've got a sense of how we can interact with them through code. But what about the really specific details of those OpenAI documents? We've mentioned URLs, base64, client.chat.completions.create. Where do we actually find those details in the documentation?
That's a great question, and that's exactly what we're going to delve into next. We'll break down the OpenAI documentation structure and highlight those key sections that'll get you started with vision capabilities.
Perfect, because once we've got that roadmap of the documentation, we can navigate it with confidence and find exactly what we need.
Yeah.
We'll be building our own vision-powered applications in no time.
Exactly. And once you see how those specific code snippets and examples fit into the bigger picture, it'll all start to click.
I love it. It's like we're putting together a puzzle. Each piece we discover makes the whole picture clearer. But for now, let's take a quick break. We'll come back refreshed and ready to tackle those OpenAI documents head on. Okay, so we've laid some groundwork. We have a general idea of how OpenAI's vision capabilities work. But where do we go from here? Where in the OpenAI docs do we find the actual, treasure? Those specific code snippets, functions, parameters that we need to make this magic happen in our own Python projects?
Well, you're in luck because the OpenAI documentation is actually pretty well structured. And even better, it caters to both beginners and more, seasoned developers.
Okay, so it's not one of those abandon all, hope you enter here kind of situations. That's good to hear.
Not at all. They actually have a dedicated section called Vision. It walks you through everything you need to know about using OpenAI models with images. It's like your one-stop shop for anything vision related.
Okay, so vision section. Got it. What kind of information can we expect to find there?
Think of it as a step-by-step guide, It starts with the basics, explains how to set up your API key and make your first API call. Then it dives into the specifics of working with images, covering those methods we talked about, using image URLs and base64 encoding.
Okay, so it's laid out in a logical way. We're not just thrown into the deep end with code.
Exactly. And as you go through the vision section, you'll find detailed explanations of the different parameters you can use to kind of customize your requests.
Ah, yes, the parameters. We talked about that earlier with the detail parameter. We can choose low, high, or auto.
Yeah.
It's like adjusting the level of zoom on how the model sees the image. Are there any other parameters we should be aware of when working with images?
Absolutely. Another really important one is max tokens. That controls the length of the model's response. You can adjust it based on how detailed you want that output to be. There's also the response format parameter. That lets you specify whether you want the response in, say, JSON format, text format, or even as a base64 encoded image.
Wow, so we have a lot of control over how the model processes the image and how it gives us those results. That's impressive. But I can see how this could get kind of overwhelming for someone who's new to Python. It's like having a toolbox full of gadgets, but not knowing what each one does.
That's why the OpenAI documentation includes a ton of code examples. They actually show you how to use all these parameters and functions in real-world scenarios. You're not just reading about it, you're seeing it in action.
Okay, so those code examples are like training wheels, helping us see how all those parameters work in practice. I like that. But let's be honest. Sometimes, even with code examples, reading documentation can feel a little dry, a little impersonal. It's like reading a textbook, which isn't always the most engaging way to learn.
Yeah, I agree. And that's where the OpenAI community comes in. There are forums, Discord servers, online communities dedicated to OpenAI, places where you can connect with other developers, share your experiences, ask questions, even collaborate on projects.
Oh, cool. So it's like having a study group, but for AI enthusiasts. We can learn from each other and get that human connection.
Exactly. There's often a wealth of knowledge and insight shared in these communities, stuff that goes beyond what you'll find in the official documentation.
Okay, so this is all starting to feel a lot less intimidating. We've got a clear roadmap for those docs, code examples to guide us, and a supportive community to help us along the way. But once we've got the basics down, what are some of the really cool things that we can actually build using these OpenAI vision capabilities?
Well, the possibilities are pretty much limitless, especially as these models keep improving. We touched on some of the potential applications earlier, but let's dive a little deeper.
Okay, yeah, let's do it.
Imagine building an application that can help visually impaired individuals navigate their surroundings. You could use OpenAI's vision models to process images from a camera and give audio descriptions of the environment, identifying obstacles, landmarks, points of interest.
Wow. That would honestly be life-changing for so many people. It's really amazing to think that we can use Python code to build something that has such a positive impact on the world.
Absolutely. And that's just one example. How about an app that can analyze fashion trends based on images from social media? You could feed the model images from Instagram, Pinterest, or fashion blogs. Have it identify emerging styles, color palettes, patterns.
Okay, so forget fashion magazines. We can have an AI fashion analyst telling us what's hot and what's not. That's pretty cool.
Right. Or even in e-commerce. We could build systems that let users search for products visually. So instead of typing in keywords, they could just upload an image of something they like. The model can find similar items based on visual features.
So if I see a cool pair of shoes on someone walking down the street, I can snap a pic and find out where to buy them. No more endless Google searches. I'm in.
Exactly. And it goes beyond retail, Think about art and creativity. We could build tools that let artists collaborate with AI, generating new ideas, exploring different styles, even creating whole artworks based on visual prompts.
Okay, that's taking things to a whole new level. It's like having an AI muse that can spark your imagination. But this all sounds so futuristic. I get how this could be achievable for experienced developers, but for someone with just 3 months of Python experience, is this really doable?
That's the beauty of OpenAI's platform. It's designed to be accessible, really, for developers of all skill levels. The documentation, it provides clear explanations and those code examples. Even beginners can follow along. And the community is super supportive, so you have those more experienced developers who are always willing to help those who are just starting out.
Okay, that's good to hear. It's like having a safety net as we take our first steps into this AI-powered world. But I have to ask, what about the cost? Using these powerful models can get expensive, right? Is it even possible for someone who's just starting out, maybe doesn't have a huge budget?
That's a good point. OpenAI does have different pricing tiers, but they also offer a free tier. That gives you enough credits to get started. Experiment a bit without spending any money.
So we can actually play around with these capabilities, build some basic applications, and get a feel for it, all without spending a dime. That's awesome.
Exactly. It's all about lowering those barriers to entry and making AI accessible.
I love that. It's like they're saying, here are the keys to the AI kingdom. Go explore and create.
Exactly. And who knows what incredible applications you'll come up with.
All right, so we've covered a lot of ground, from those OpenAI vision capabilities to the mind-blowing things we can build. We've got our roadmap for the documentation, those code examples, and our supportive community backing us up. I'm definitely feeling ready to dive in and start building. What about you?
Absolutely. And remember, the key is to experiment, have fun, and don't be afraid to mess up. That's how we learn and grow.
Couldn't agree more. But before we unleash those inner AI visionaries, let's take a quick pause to gather our thoughts, and we'll be back with some final tips and resources to help you get started on your OpenAI vision journey. Okay, so visionaries, welcome back. We've been through the what and the why of OpenAI's vision capabilities, even peeked into the how. But now, let's get you equipped with the actual tools and resources you need to turn those light bulb moments into actual Python projects. Where do we start?
Well, we've talked a lot about the documentation, and honestly, it's your best friend on this journey. But even with our roadmap, I know diving into documentation can feel a bit overwhelming. Like entering a massive library, it's easy to get lost.
Exactly. So how do we avoid wandering aimlessly in the OpenAI documentation? Any tips for finding what we need quickly and efficiently?
Absolutely. First thing, use that search function. It's your superpower to pinpoint specific functions, parameters, or any concepts you're looking for. Don't be shy, type in those keywords.
So if I'm struggling with, let's say, base 64 in coding, I can just search base 64 and it'll take me right to the relevant spots.
Exactly. Saves you so much time scrolling through pages and pages. Oh, and another pro tip, don't underestimate the example section. OpenAI has a bunch of practical code snippets that show you how to use different vision capabilities.
Oh yeah, the examples. Love those. It's like a cheat sheet for the documentation.
Right. They show you how to structure your code, how to call the API, format your requests, even handle different image inputs. It's learning by doing, which is usually the best way.
Okay, so we've got the search function for specific info, the examples for hands-on learning. Any other hidden gems in the documentation we should know about?
Definitely check out the best practices section. It's packed with tips on optimizing your code, managing those costs, and making sure your applications run smoothly. They even have guidance on picking the right detail level for your images, which can really impact your token usage and cost.
Okay, best practices. Always a good idea. It's like having a mentor looking over your shoulder, giving you tips. But even with all these resources, sometimes you just need that human connection. Someone to brainstorm with, troubleshoot, or celebrate those little victories.
Totally agree. That's where the OpenAI community comes in. Those online forums, Discord servers, even local meetups. Places where you can connect with others who are passionate about AI and OpenAI.
Like a support system for your AI journey.
You got it. And don't forget about asking questions. The community is super welcoming. Whether you're stuck with a piece of code or need a push in the right direction, people are always happy to help.
Okay, so we have the documentation as our guide, the community for support, and a whole world of possibilities out there. But how do we stay up to date? The AI world moves so fast. How do we make sure we're not falling behind?
That's a great question. One of the best ways is subscribing to OpenAI's blog. Follow them on social media. They're always announcing new models, features, updates. And keep an eye on those community forums. That's often where you'll first hear about the latest developments, get insights from others who are really pushing the boundaries.
Okay, so stay connected, stay curious, never stop learning. That seems like the motto for navigating this world of AI.
Yeah.
But before we wrap up, I want to touch on something we mentioned earlier. The huge power and potential impact of these vision capabilities. It's not just about making cool apps, it's about using technology to make a real difference.
You're absolutely right. OpenAI's vision capabilities, they have the potential to completely transform tons of fields: healthcare, education, accessibility, art. And it's up to us as developers to use these tools responsibly and ethically to create solutions that benefit everyone and tackle some of those big challenges out there.
That's a great point to end on. It reminds us that we're not just writing code, we're shaping the future. And with OpenAI's vision capabilities in our hands, that future looks pretty amazing,
Yeah.
full of possibilities just waiting to be explored.
I couldn't agree more.
Well, that brings our deep dive into OpenAI's vision capabilities to a close. I hope you're feeling inspired and ready to take on new challenges. Remember, those OpenAI documents are no longer something to be intimidated by. They're a doorway to a world of creativity and innovation. So go out there, Python adventurers, build something incredible. Hey everyone, and welcome. If you're listening to this, chances are you've got about 3 months of Python under your belt, and now you're eyeing that OpenAI API, especially the image generation stuff. All right?
Sounds about right.
But let's be real. Diving into documentation can sometimes feel like, well, trying to read a dictionary in a foreign language.
I can definitely see that.
So in this deep dive, we're going to break down that OpenAI documentation, give you a clear roadmap so you can navigate it like a pro.
Exactly. We'll demystify those technical terms and give you a lay of the land so you can approach the documentation with confidence, not confusion.
Perfect. So before we jump into the code, let's take a step back and talk about what you can actually do with the OpenAI Image API. What's in this toolkit, so to speak?
Okay, so think of it like this. It boils down to three core functionalities, three tools you've got: generations, edits, and variations.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Generations. That sounds pretty powerful. Break that down for me.
Yeah, so with generations, you're creating images from scratch, just using a text description. That description is called a prompt. You tell the AI what you want to see, and it brings your vision to life, like magic.
Wow. Okay, I'm starting to get the picture. So what about edits?
Edits are where you get to modify existing images. You use what's called a mask to select certain parts of an image you want to change, and then use a text prompt to tell the AI what you want in their place.
So like if I had a picture of a car and I wanted to give it like monster truck wheels.
You got it. You could totally do that with edits, and then you've got variations.
Okay, variations. Hit me with it.
With variations, you can generate different versions of an image you already have. Say you've got a logo you like, but you want to see what it looks like in different colors or styles. Variations will whip up a bunch of options for you.
Okay, I'm seeing how powerful this API can be. But I'm guessing there's more to it than just these three functions.
Right. You also need to choose the right model for the job. OpenAI has a couple of main models for image generation: DALL-E 2 and DALL-E 3. Kind of like choosing different Python libraries. Each one's got its own strengths.
So how do I know which DALL-E is right for me? DALL-E 2 versus DALL-E 3? What's the deal?
Okay, so DALL-E 2 gives you access to all three of those functionalities we talked about: generations, edits, and variations. Plus, you can make multiple image requests at once. If you're new to this and want to play around, DALL-E 2 is a great place to start.
Got it. So DALL-E 2 is like the all-in-one package. What about DALL-E 3? What makes it stand out?
DALL-E 3 is all about image quality and size. You get larger, higher resolution images that tend to be more realistic. It's laser focused on generations. So if you're after that wow factor and need top-notch quality, DALL-E 3 is your go-to.
Interesting. So DALL-E 2 for versatility, DALL-E 3 when you need those stunning high-definition results.
Exactly. Now let's bring this down to earth a bit, especially since we're talking to Python beginners here.
Please do. I'm still getting my Python legs under me.
No worries. You'll be using Python code to talk to the OpenAI API, and it's really not as scary as it sounds. You'll use a library called OpenAI. It's your one-stop shop for anything OpenAI. Like importing other libraries you've used before, this gives you the functions you need.
Okay, I'm breathing a little easier, so walk me through it. What's the first function I should wrap my head around?
When you want to generate images, the star of the show is the client.images.generate function. This is your command center for creating AI images. Think of it like this. You give it instructions, your text prompt, and a few other things, and it relays those to the AI model, which gets busy creating your image.
So client.images.generate is like sending a message to my AI artist saying, here's what I want you to paint.
Precisely.
Hmm.
And within this function, there are some key parameters you need to understand to really control what you're creating.
Parameters, is that like fine-tuning my request, giving the AI more specific instructions?
Exactly. They're like the dials and knobs you can tweak. You've got the model parameter where you specify if you're using DALL-E 2 or DALL-E 3. And then there's the prompt. That's where you describe the image you want to generate. Let your imagination run wild.
So model is like picking my artist, and
Yeah.
prompt is giving them the creative brief. What other parameters should I know about?
You've got size, which determines the dimensions of your image, like choosing the canvas size. Then there's quality standard or high definition. And N lets you decide how many variations of the image you want in one go.
Wait, so I can get multiple versions with one request? That's cool.
Yeah. And here's a fun fact about size in DALL-E 3. It automatically defaults to square images, 1024 by 4024 pixels. But you can also choose landscape or portrait orientation if you need to.
Like choosing the aspect ratio for a photo,
I
right?
got it. Now here's where DALL-E 3 gets even cooler. It actually rewrites your prompts a bit for safety and to add more detail, and you can see that revised prompt in the response you get back.
So the AI is double-checking my work and making it even better.
You could say that. But, sometimes you want to experiment with super simple prompts just to see what the AI does. For that, there's a neat trick.
Do tell.
Add this to your prompt. I need to test how the tool works with extremely simple prompts. Do not add any detail, just use it as is. DALL-E 3 will respect that.
Handy. Okay, so we've covered using client.images.generate and its key parameters to create images from nothing. But what if I want to start with an existing image and, let's say get a little wild with it?
Now you're talking edits, which is a DALL-E 2 exclusive, and that, my friend, is a whole other adventure. All right, so with edits, you can take an image and, blend it with AI creativity. It's pretty wild. Let's say you've got a picture of a bicycle, right?
Okay, I'm picturing it.
And you decide, hey, I want to add rocket engines to this thing.
Yep.
Make it a futuristic speed machine.
Now that's an image I want to see.
Edits can make that happen. You'd use this function called client.images.edit. That's the one specifically for this. You feed it your bicycle image, then you create something called a mask, highlighting the areas where you want those rocket engines to go, and of course a text prompt describing those futuristic additions.
Okay, I'm with you so far. But the mask part, I'm not quite picturing that.
Think of it like a stencil. You lay over your image. It's a separate image, usually in black and white. The black areas tell the AI, don't touch this part of the original, and the white areas are like saying, this is where the magic happens. Change this based on the prompt.
So in my rocket bike masterpiece, I'd create a black and white mask, and the white areas would be like outlining where I want the rocket engines to blast off from.
Exactly. You're directing the AI's attention to those specific spots. Now, little heads up, when you're using masks with DALL-E 2, both the image and the mask need to be square PNG files under 4 MB,
Yeah.
and they got to have the same dimensions.
Matching dimensions, square PNG files. Got it. Anything else about masks I should keep in mind?
One thing that trips people up is that the AI doesn't really care about the non-transparent areas of the mask. Those don't have to perfectly match the original image.
So it's a little more forgiving than I thought.
Yep. So you upload your bicycle image, your mask, all prepped for those rocket engines, and then your prompt describing them in all their glory.
And that
Then the AI takes the wheel, so to speak. It blends those new elements right into your image, makes it look as seamless and realistic as possible. You end up with a brand new image, merging your vision with AI power.
now that's what I call collaboration.
Huh.
Okay, so generations is for starting fresh, edits for modifying. What about variations? How do I put that tool to work?
Variations is all about exploring different possibilities from an existing image. You give the AI a starting image, and it creates a whole bunch of new images that share some visual DNA with the original.
So let's say I feed it a photo of, a sunflower. Would it give me variations with different colors, different petals, maybe different backgrounds?
That's the idea. You use this function client.images.create a variation for this, and just like with edits, your input image needs to be a square PNG file under 4 MB.
Same file requirements, check.
Yeah.
Is there anything else I need to tell the AI when I'm using variations?
Nope. You don't even have to give it a text prompt this time. The AI takes all its cues from that original image and uses its own algorithms to create the variations.
That's pretty cool. It's like saying, hey, AI, riff on this theme.
Exactly. Before we go any further, though, there's an important aspect we should touch upon. Content moderation.
Content moderation. What does that have to do with AI image generation?
Well, both your prompts, what you tell the AI, and the images it generates, they all go through a screening process based on OpenAI's usage policies.
I see. It's like a safety check to make sure the AI is being used responsibly.
That's the idea. It's all about responsible AI. So we've covered the three main functionalities: generations, edits, variations. We talked about choosing between DALL-E 2 and DALL-E 3. But for someone who's just starting out with Python, what are some, practical tips that can make working with this API a little smoother?
That's a great question. I'm sure there are little things that can trip you up when you're first starting out.
Oh, definitely. There are some common hurdles for beginners. Like, let's talk about handling image data, especially if you're using Node.js. In Node.js, you often work with these things called buffer objects to, store image data in memory.
Buffer objects. Okay. That's a new one for me. What are those all about?
You can think of a buffer object like a temporary container that holds the raw data of your image. When you're making an API call, you need to make sure the API knows that the data you're sending is actually a PNG image.
So how do I do that? Like, how do I make sure the API gets the message?
There's this little trick you can use. You set the name property of that buffer object to something like image.png. It's like a little label that helps the API understand what it's dealing with.
Ah, I see. Like labeling the container so the API knows exactly what's inside.
Ah.
Clever. Okay, any other tips, especially for someone like me who's, still finding their way around Python?
Let's talk about TypeScript. A lot of developers are using it these days because it's got these great type safety features, but it can be a little, particular when it comes to image file arguments.
Particular how?
Sometimes TypeScript throws errors because it's expecting a specific data type for the image file, and what you're giving it doesn't quite match up. The solution is to use something called casting.
Casting, like in a movie.
Haha, sort of. In this case,
Right.
casting means you're telling TypeScript, hey, trust me on this one, treat this data as this specific type, even if it doesn't quite look like it right now. You basically add any in front of the argument. It tells TypeScript to chill out a bit with its type checking just for that instance.
Okay, so it's like a little nudge to TypeScript saying, I've got this.
You got it. And one more tip, super important when you're working with APIs, error handling. You got to be prepared for when things go wrong.
Error handling.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard the term, but to be honest, I'm not entirely sure what it entails. Fill me in.
Think of it this way. Sometimes your API requests might fail. There could be all sorts of reasons, right? Invalid inputs, maybe there's a network issue, or you could even hit something called a rate limit.
Rate limit, what's that?
So APIs, they often have limits on how many requests you can make within a certain time period. It's to prevent things from getting overloaded. If you hit that limit, your request is going to fail.
Ah, makes sense. So error handling is like having a backup plan, just in case things don't go as planned.
You got it. The way you usually do this in Python is by using a try.catch block.
Okay, break that down for me. Try.catch. How does that work?
Imagine it as a safety net. The try part is where you put the code that could potentially cause an error. The catch part is the code that handles the error, if it happens.
So if the API request fails for some reason, the catch part steps in and says, hey, here's what went wrong.
Exactly. It gives you that information. You can display a nice error message to the user, or you can log that error so you can debug it later. Or you could even try making the API request again after a short delay. Give it another shot.
Wow, this is all super helpful. I feel like I'm actually starting to get a grip on how to tackle this OpenAI documentation and write some real code.
That's the goal. We've given you those key points, those signposts to help you along the way. Remember, the point isn't to memorize the entire documentation. It's about understanding the core concepts, the building blocks.
Yeah, and then using those building blocks to actually create something. That's the fun part.
That's it. Just like with learning Python, practice makes perfect. Try things out, experiment, play with those prompts, mess around with the parameters, and see what happens.
I'm feeling inspired.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the OpenAI Image API, what's the one thing you'd want our listeners to remember?
AI image generation, it's not this mysterious thing anymore. With a little Python know-how and these core concepts, anyone can bring their ideas to life visually.
That's a great way to put it. And hey, remember, that documentation, it's there to help you, not scare you. We've given you the tools to approach it with confidence, so go out there, have fun, explore, and create amazing things.
Happy coding, everyone.
Ever wish you could build an app that not only understands you, but like talks back? Like having a real conversation with your computer.
Yeah.
That's the power we're diving into today, OpenAI's audio generation capabilities.
Right.
And don't worry, we're keeping it practical for you. This deep dive is like your personal cheat sheet to navigating the OpenAI documentation on audio, especially if you're a Python beginner with around 3 months of experience.
That's right. We're going to decode the docs together, highlighting what's important for you to grasp those core concepts.
Yeah.
Think of this as building a mental roadmap so you can jump into those docs with confidence and actually start building cool stuff.
Love that. A roadmap.
A roadmap.
So no more feeling lost in a sea of technical jargon. All right, let's get started. We're working with excerpts from the official OpenAI documentation on audio generation. And first things first, OpenAI isn't just about text anymore.
Definitely not. We're now in a world where AI can understand and generate human-like speech. That means we can interact with AI using our voices, not just typing.
Okay, I have to admit, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
But why is audio so powerful?
Hmm.
It's just spoken words.
Well, think about it. When you listen to someone speak, you pick up on so much more than just the words themselves.
Yeah.
Their tone of voice, their inflection, even subtle pauses can completely change the meaning of what they're saying.
Right.
Audio captures those nuances that text alone just can't convey.
I see what you mean. Like, think about sarcasm.
Oh, yeah.
It's tough to get that across in text, but with audio, it's obvious.
Exactly. Or imagine trying to analyze the emotions in a customer service call just by reading a transcript. You'd miss out on so much valuable information. Audio brings in that human element, and that opens up a whole new world of possibilities for how we can use AI.
So how about some real-world examples? How can someone actually use these audio capabilities?
Think about creating spoken summaries of long articles or reports. That could be a game changer for accessibility. Making information more digestible for people who prefer listening or have difficulty reading.
Or imagine analyzing the sentiment in audio recordings to gauge customer satisfaction or understand public opinion on a certain topic.
Exactly. And the documentation highlights even more exciting applications like real-time translation or generating personalized audio content based on individual preferences.
All right. We're definitely getting the why audio is important, but let's get into the how.
Mhm.
The documentation dives into a Python code example to show you how it's done. Now, I know you're aiming this at Python beginners.
Right.
So how approachable is this code?
It might seem a bit intimidating at first glance, but we're going to break it down step by step, focusing on the high-level logic for you. We'll explain the core concepts and make sure you understand what's happening without getting bogged down in the syntax.
Awesome. I think that's key for new programmers, understanding the why behind the code, not just the what. So what's the first thing we see in this example?
The example kicks off with importing necessary libraries, including the OpenAI library. You'll use this to interact with OpenAI's API, which is essentially how you communicate with their powerful AI models.
So it's like grabbing the right tools before you start building something.
Precisely. Think of the OpenAI library as your toolkit for working with all the amazing features OpenAI offers.
Then the code creates an instance of the OpenAI client. What exactly does that mean?
It's like establishing a direct connection to the OpenAI service. It's
Yeah.
how you'll send your requests like, hey, AI, can you generate some audio for me? And receive responses back.
Got it. So it's like opening a communication channel.
Right.
What happens next?
The next step is where the magic happens. You use this method called client.chat.completions.create to send your request to the OpenAI API. Don't worry too much about the exact name. Just think of it as giving instructions to the AI chef,
Okay.
telling them what kind of audio dish you want them to cook up.
Okay, so we're placing our order. What kind of instructions are we giving in this case?
This method requires a few key parameters. The model parameter specifies which AI model you want to use. Think of it like choosing a chef with specific skills. In this case, the code uses a model called GPT-4 Audio Preview, which is great for audio generation.
Interesting. And then there's something called modalities, which sounds a little complex.
Don't worry, it's simpler than it sounds. It just means you get to tell the AI what kind of input you're giving it and what kind of output you want back.
Okay.
In this case, we're dealing with both text and audio because we're giving the AI a text prompt and asking for an audio response.
Ah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So we're dealing with two different modes of communication.
Right.
What other parameters are we feeding the AI chef?
There's also the audio parameter where you can specify the voice you want the AI to use and the format you want the audio file to be in. It's like choosing the specific ingredients and presentation for your audio dish.
I love that analogy.
Yeah.
So we're getting pretty specific with our order.
Yes.
What's next?
Finally, there's the messages parameter, which contains the actual text prompt that you want the AI to respond to. This is where you get to be creative and tell the AI what you want it to say.
So it's like writing down your order on a piece of paper and handing it to the chef.
Exactly. And once the chef, or in this case the OpenAI API, receives your order, it gets to work, processing your request and cooking up that delicious audio response.
That's a great way to think about it. It sounds like we've covered the basics of generating audio with OpenAI's API,
Yes,
but I'm guessing there's a lot more to explore.
absolutely. We've only just scratched the surface. We'll dive deeper into more advanced concepts like multi-turn conversations and different modalities in the next part of our deep dive. But for now, you have a solid foundation for understanding how to generate basic audio responses using OpenAI's API.
All right, listeners, get ready to level up your audio skills in part 2.
Yeah. Welcome back. In the last part, we talked about how you can use Python code to generate audio with OpenAI's API. You essentially send a text prompt, kind of like an order to a chef, and the API whips up an audio response for you. But what if you want to go beyond a single interaction? What if you want to have a real back and forth conversation with the AI using your voice?
That's what I'm really curious about. The documentation mentions multi-turn conversations, which sounds super cool, but also a bit complex. How does that actually work?
It's all about maintaining context and flow. Imagine you're having a conversation with a friend. You build on each other's thoughts, refer back to previous points, and the whole thing feels natural and connected. Multi-turn conversations with the AI aim to replicate that kind of experience.
So it's not just a series of one-off requests. The AI remembers what's been said before.
Exactly. And the way it does this is through something called message IDs. Think of these as unique labels attached to each message in the conversation. This helps the AI keep track of the order of messages and understand how they relate to each other.
Okay, so it's like each message gets a little tag, and the AI uses those tags to piece together the entire conversation, making sure its responses make sense in context.
Precisely. Now, to really see how these message IDs work, it helps to look at the JSON data structure that the API uses. It might sound a bit technical, but think of JSON as a set of instructions written in a language that both you and the AI can understand.
So instead of just hearing the audio output, we can actually peek behind the scenes
Right.
and see how the AI is organizing the conversation.
Yes. The JSON data shows you things like the role of each message, whether it's from the user or the assistant, the content of the message, and of course that all-important message ID. By looking at this data, you can start to see how the conversation flows and how the AI is using message IDs to maintain context.
This is starting to make a lot of sense. But why should someone care about understanding JSON? Isn't it enough to just hear the AI's responses?
Well, if you just want to use pre-built AI applications, then maybe not. But if you're a developer, understanding JSON opens up a whole world of possibilities. It allows you to build custom applications that interact with the AI in really sophisticated ways. For example, you could build a voice-controlled chatbot that remembers past interactions and provides personalized responses based on the user's history.
Wow, that sounds amazing. Okay, so we've tackled multi-turn conversations. Now, the documentation also keeps mentioning these modalities, and I'm still a bit fuzzy on what that means.
Modalities just refer to the different ways you can input information to the AI and receive output back. Remember how in the Python code example, we were giving the AI text input and getting audio output? That's one type of modality. Text in, a text, plus audio out.
So the arrow means becomes. Like, I give it text, and it becomes text and audio.
You got it. The documentation also mentions audio in, text out, which means you could give the AI an audio recording and it would transcribe it into text for you.
Oh, that's cool. Like a superpowered transcription service.
Yeah, exactly. And there are other combinations as well, depending on what you're trying to achieve. The key takeaway is that OpenAI's API is incredibly flexible. It allows you to work with both text and audio in all sorts of different ways.
This is all starting to feel a lot less intimidating. It's like, okay, there are these different building blocks, these modalities, and I can choose the ones that make sense for my project.
That's the spirit.
Mm-hmm.
And speaking of building blocks, let's talk about these two different approaches to using audio with OpenAI. The real-time API and chat completions. They both allow you to work with audio, but they have different strengths and weaknesses.
Okay, so what's the main difference between them? When would I choose one over the other?
Think about it like this. The real-time API is all about speed. It's designed for applications where you need near instantaneous audio processing, like live transcription or interactive voice assistance. Imagine you're building a translator app that converts speech to text in real time. You'd need an API that can keep up with the pace of a live conversation.
So if I'm building something where every millisecond counts, the real-time API is my best bet.
Exactly. On the other hand, chat completions are more suited for tasks where latency isn't as critical. These are asynchronous, meaning you send a request and then get a response back a little later. This is perfect for things like generating audio summaries of long documents or analyzing the sentiment of an audio recording. You don't need the results instantaneously in those cases.
Got it.
Right.
So, real-time API for speed demons, chat completions for more complex tasks where response time isn't as crucial.
Precisely. It's all about choosing the right tool for the job. Now, before we wrap up part two, there's one more concept I want to touch on: tokens. Remember how we talked about breaking down language into its smallest meaningful units? Well, tokens are essentially those building blocks.
Right, so it's like separating a sentence into individual words and punctuation marks.
Exactly. And this concept of tokens applies to both text and audio. When you give the AI an audio recording, it first converts that audio into a sequence of tokens, just like it does with text. This is how the AI models are able to understand and process the audio.
So the AI isn't actually hearing the audio in the way we do, it's converting it into this tokenized form that it can work with.
That's right. And to give you a sense of scale, the documentation mentions that roughly 1 hour of audio input translates to about 128,000 tokens. That's a lot of information packed into an hour of speech.
Wow, that really highlights the complexity of working with audio data. But it also makes me realize how powerful these AI models are. They can take all that information and do some pretty amazing things with it.
Absolutely. And we'll dive into some of those amazing things in part three, where we'll explore even more advanced audio capabilities and resources that will empower you to take your OpenAI skills to the next level.
All right, listeners, stay tuned for the grand finale. Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into OpenAI's audio capabilities. We've covered a lot of ground, from generating basic audio responses and having multi-turn conversations, to understanding those different modalities and even getting a glimpse into how the AI processes audio using tokens.
It's been quite a journey, hasn't it? But we're not done yet. We want to make sure you feel empowered to explore the OpenAI documentation on your own and discover even more amazing things you can do with audio.
Exactly. So consider this part your treasure map to even more audio riches. The documentation points to several other areas worth checking out. One that caught my eye is text-to-speech. What's that all about?
That's where OpenAI provides specialized models for generating incredibly human-like speech from text input. Think of it as giving your written words a voice.
Okay, so if I have a blog post or even a whole book, I could use this to create an audio version.
Precisely. It opens up a world of possibilities for things like audiobooks, voiceovers, or even personalized greetings.
That's amazing. And what if I need to go the other way? From speech to text.
The documentation has you covered there too. They have a section on speech to text, which is all about converting audio recordings into written text. Think of it as having a super-powered transcriptionist at your fingertips, able to process audio with incredible speed and accuracy.
So I could use this to analyze meeting recordings, generate subtitles for videos, or even create interactive transcripts.
Absolutely. And we can't forget about the real-time API, which we touched on earlier. The documentation has a whole section dedicated to this low-latency powerhouse, perfect for building applications that demand instantaneous audio processing.
Right, we talked about things like real-time translation and interactive voice assistants. Those require light and fast responses, which is where the real-time API shines.
Exactly. Now, if you're feeling truly adventurous and want to explore every nook and cranny of OpenAI's audio capabilities, the documentation points you to the full API reference. This is where you'll find all the detailed parameters, options, and technical nuances for working with audio in the OpenAI API.
It sounds a bit like the ultimate technical manual.
It is, but don't let that intimidate you. Remember, you don't need to memorize everything in the documentation. The key is to know what's there and how to find the information you need when you need it.
That's a great point. It's more about having that roadmap, that sense of familiarity, so you don't feel lost when you dive into the docs.
Precisely. And that brings us back to our initial goal for this deep dive. We wanted to equip you, our listeners, with the knowledge and a confidence to navigate the OpenAI audio documentation without feeling overwhelmed.
And I think we've achieved that. We've broken down the jargon, explained the logic, and given you a framework for understanding how it all fits together.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you're no longer just a passive reader of documentation. You're an active explorer ready to delve into the details, experiment with different approaches, and even start building your own audio-powered applications.
And that brings us to our final provocative thought for this deep dive. We've explored the what and the how of OpenAI's audio capabilities. But now it's time to think about the why for you. What kind of problem do you want to solve? What kind of experience do you want to create?
The possibilities are practically endless. Think about how you can uniquely apply these audio capabilities to make the world a more interesting, more interactive, and more accessible place.
We've only scratched the surface, but hopefully we've sparked your imagination and given you the tools to go out there and create something truly amazing.
So go forth, explore, experiment, and most importantly, have fun. We can't wait to see what you build.
And that's our show for today. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time. All right, so get ready, because today we are going to unlock OpenAI's text-to-speech magic. And we're going to do it by diving deep into their documentation.
Sounds exciting.
Now, I know. Technical documentation, it can be a little bit of a jungle out there sometimes, especially if you're kind of early on in your coding journey. Like if you've got maybe, I don't know, 3 months of Python experience under your belt.
Yeah, it can be a little intimidating at first.
Exactly. So we're going to map it all out together so by the end you can confidently build your own text-to-speech projects.
That's right. We're going to give you a clear understanding of the core concepts and that architecture before you even open those docs.
Perfect.
We'll hold your hand the whole way.
All right, so let's start with the what and the why.
Okay.
What exactly is text-to-speech, TTS? I mean, it sounds pretty self-explanatory, but what's the big deal here? Why is it so cool?
Well, yeah, you're right. TTS basically transforms written text into spoken audio, right? It's what powers a lot of things we use all the time these days. Those virtual assistants, audiobooks, even those videos where you hear blog posts read out loud.
Oh, okay.
We're specifically looking at OpenAI's API for this, and they detail this all out in their text-to-speech document.
Okay, so I get how that could be useful for making content more accessible, but where else is this technology really making waves? What are the cool things going on?
Well, think about real-time applications.
Ooh, okay.
You could create, interactive tools or games where the audio feedback is adapting to what the user's doing.
Wow.
And that's where OpenAI's API really comes in handy because it has those real-time output capabilities.
That's so cool.
Yeah, it's really neat.
Okay, so if I'm picturing myself building one of these awesome TTS projects, what are the key elements I need to know about when it comes to OpenAI's speech endpoint? What are the ingredients I need to work with?
Well, it's actually pretty straightforward. To use their API, you need to provide 3 main inputs.
3, okay.
First up is the model, and this essentially determines your audio quality.
Okay.
You've got 2 options there. You've got TTS1 for standard quality, and then you've got TTS1 HD for high definition.
So TTS1 HD, that seems like the way to go if you want like that top-notch, really amazing audio experience.
Well, it depends on what you're aiming for, right? Because
Yeah.
TTS1 HD will give you amazing sound quality, but the trade-off is speed.
Okay.
So if you're building something where you need super fast response times, like that real-time application,
Right, yeah.
then TTS1 might actually be the better fit, even if there's a bit more static in the audio.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So it's like choosing between, I don't know, a high-resolution photo that takes forever to load or one that's slightly less detailed but pops up instantly.
That's the perfect analogy.
I like that.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So besides the model, what other ingredients do we need for this text-to-speech recipe? What else goes in the bowl?
All right, so next up you have the text input, and this one's pretty simple. It's just the content you want to hear spoken out loud, all right? Pretty easy.
Okay.
And then finally, you have the voice.
Ooh, the voice.
And OpenAI offers a range of voices, each with its own kind of unique personality and style. And they actually have names, so we're talking like Alloy, Ash, Coral, Echo, Fable, Onyx, Nova, Sage, and Shimmer.
Ooh, wow. That's quite the lineup.
Yeah.
So it sounds like choosing the right voice. That's pretty crucial, I imagine.
Oh, absolutely. Think of it like casting a voice actor for your project, right?
Okay.
The voice that you choose is going to set the tone, the feel of the entire audio experience.
Great.
So for instance, if you're creating something for a younger audience, then maybe Fable with its kind of light and playful tone is perfect.
Cute.
But if you're going for a more, I don't know, professional feel, then Onyx is a popular choice.
Okay, those are great tips.
Yeah.
So we've got our model, we've got our text, we've got our voice. It's all ready to go. But how do we actually bring these elements together using Python?
Well, this is where the code comes in. And OpenAI makes it surprisingly user-friendly. They actually provide this really simple Python code snippet in their documentation that shows you exactly how to use the API.
Oh, great.
So it starts by importing the necessary libraries, creating an OpenAI client, and specifying the path where you want to save that audio file.
Okay, so far so good. We're setting the stage for the main event here.
Yeah, exactly.
So what happens next?
All right, well, then we have the star of the show, the client.audio.speech.create function.
Whoa, okay, that's a bit of a mouthful.
It is, but think of it like this. Client refers to that OpenAI client that we created earlier, audio.speech, that tells the API that we're specifically working with text-to-speech functionality, and then create, well, that's the action. It's what actually creates the audio output based on the model, the text, and the voice that we've selected.
Ah, okay, so we're basically feeding our chosen elements to this function, and
Ugh.
it magically, like, spits out audio.
Yeah, it's like magic, right?
That's pretty impressive.
And what's really great is that even with, you said 3 months of Python experience, you can understand what's going on in this code snippet. It's very readable.
That's great. I love that. I love that it's accessible.
Yeah, it's well-written code.
Now, you mentioned MP3 as an output format earlier. Are there other options available?
Absolutely. The OpenAI API is quite flexible when it comes to those output formats. So besides MP3, which is the default, you've also got Opus, WAV, FLAC, and PCM.
Wow. That's a lot of choices.
Yeah.
Is there like a simple way to decide which format's the best for, your specific project?
Well, it's all about, thinking about how you're going to use the audio.
Okay.
So if it's for like online streaming, Opus is often a good choice for top-notch audio quality. FLAC is favored by many, audiophiles.
Yep.
And if your project's very, very sensitive to delays, then WAV or PCM might be the way to go.
So it's really about matching the format to your project's needs.
Exactly.
All right.
And I would say experimentation is key.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, the more you experiment, the better you'll understand the strengths and weaknesses of each format and how it impacts your final audio output.
Now, I am really intrigued by this idea of real-time audio streaming. It sounds incredibly futuristic.
It is.
Like, what's the secret sauce behind that technology?
Well, real-time streaming is all about delivering that audio as it's being generated without having to wait for the entire file to be created, right?
Right.
So the magic really lies in this technique called chunk transfer encoding.
Chunk transfer encoding. That sounds interesting.
Yeah, imagine sending the audio in like bite-sized pieces instead of waiting for the whole file to be ready.
Okay.
So you start hearing the speech almost instantly as it's being created.
Wow, that's amazing. I can see how that opens up so many possibilities for those interactive applications we were talking about.
Oh, absolutely. Think about, real-time voice translation, interactive games, or even personalized audio experiences that react to user input in real time. It's really endless, the possibilities.
It really is. That's so fascinating. But before we get too carried away, dreaming up all these incredible applications, let's talk about language support.
Okay.
Can this API handle multiple languages? Can I, have my text translated and spoken in, I don't know, like German or something?
That's a great question, and the documentation mentions that the TTS model generally follows the Whisper model in terms of language support.
Well, that's great because the Whisper model, that supports a wide array of languages.
It does, but it's important to note that while the Whisper model might support, all these languages, the voices that are currently available are optimized for English.
Okay.
So you can technically generate speech in other languages.
Right.
But it might not have that same level of naturalness and fluency as English.
Okay, so it's like, it's possible, but maybe not perfect.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, but it's still really remarkable to have this level of language flexibility.
Sure, for sure.
Now, before we move on, I think it's helpful to kind of tackle some frequently asked questions that might be on your mind.
Sounds good. What are some common questions that people have about using OpenAI's text-to-speech API?
Well, one that comes up a lot is about controlling the emotional range of the generated audio.
Okay.
Can you make the voice sound happy or sad or angry?
That would be cool.
It would be so cool, right? It would add so much depth to the audio, but unfortunately, the documentation states that there's currently no direct way to to control that emotional output. And things like capitalization and punctuation, those might influence the tone slightly.
Okay.
But their internal tests have shown that the results are really inconsistent.
So for now, we have to stick with the default emotional tone of each voice.
For now, yeah.
Hopefully that's something they develop further in the future.
I agree. It's a really exciting prospect.
It is.
Another common question is about creating custom voices.
Ooh, interesting.
A lot of people wonder, can I clone my own voice or create like a totally unique voice for my projects?
Yeah, I can see why that would be appealing, like having your own personal AI narrator.
Right. I mean, it's a cool concept, but unfortunately the documentation clearly states that custom voice creation, that's not supported by OpenAI right now.
Okay, so we have those 9 really great voices to work with.
9 amazing voices, yeah.
Awesome.
Now, let's address one more really important question, and this is about ownership.
Okay.
Who owns the audio files that are generated using OpenAI's API?
Right, that's a big question, especially if you're planning to use these commercially or anything.
Absolutely. And the good news is that you, the creator, you own the outputted audio files.
Okay.
However, there's an important point to remember. You have to inform your audience that the audio they're hearing, it's AI generated, it's not a real human voice.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Transparency is definitely crucial when it comes to using AI.
Absolutely. So you own the rights to your creations, but, ethical AI practice requires that you're upfront about using AI.
For sure. Okay, that covers those frequently asked questions.
It does.
So as we kind of wrap up this section, what are some key takeaways that our listeners should keep in mind as they embark on their text-to-speech journey with OpenAI?
Okay, so quick recap. Remember those 3 essential ingredients: the model, the text, and the voice.
Yes.
Those are your building blocks.
Got it.
Also, familiarize yourself with that simple Python code structure that they provide in the documentation. Don't let it intimidate you.
Don't be scared.
And maybe most importantly, embrace the spirit of experimentation.
Yes, play around.
Play around with different voices, try different output formats, even see how the model responds to different input text. The more you explore, the more you'll discover, the amazing potential of this API.
That's great advice. And remember, the OpenAI documentation, it's there to help you. It's not there to hinder you. And with the knowledge you've gained today, you are ready to tackle it with confidence and unlock those fantastic possibilities of text-to-speech.
Absolutely.
We'll be right back after a short break to dive even deeper.
Welcome back. So now that we've got, like a good grasp of the basics, let's explore some of those practical tips and techniques that can really, level up your text-to-speech game.
Okay, sounds good. I'm always up for learning some of those insider tricks, the things that really make a difference.
Exactly.
So what should our listeners keep in mind when they're working with text input?
Well, one thing I'd recommend is to really pay attention to the structure and the formatting of your text.
Okay.
The OpenAI model is pretty smart, but clear, concise text, it's generally going to yield better results.
Right.
So avoid those overly long sentences or complex grammatical structures.
So it's kind of like writing for the web, right?
Yeah.
You want to keep it scannable, easy to digest.
That's the perfect analogy.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. You can also use punctuation to kind of, influence the pauses and the intonation of the speech.
Okay.
So commas, for instance, those will create shorter pauses while periods create longer ones.
So I could experiment with punctuation to fine-tune the rhythm and flow of the speech.
Precisely.
That's cool.
Yeah. Now, another aspect that often kind of trips up beginners, it's dealing with abbreviations and acronyms.
Okay.
The documentation doesn't go into a ton of detail about this,
Right.
but it's something to be mindful of.
Yeah, so what kind of issues can arise with abbreviations and acronyms?
Well, depending on the context, the model might pronounce them letter by letter,
Okay.
or it might try to pronounce them as words, which can sound, a little unnatural.
Right.
So, for example, if you have AI in your text, you might want to specify whether you want it pronounced as AI or artificial intelligence.
Oh, okay. Yes, those little nuances, right? That can really make a big difference in the final output.
Huge difference, exactly.
Okay. Any other advice for making the most of that text input?
Well, numbers can be a bit tricky too. Think about how you want them pronounced. Do you want the model to read 1999 as 1999 or 1999?
Oh, wow. I hadn't even considered that.
Yeah, it's something to think about.
So we might need to spell out numbers or rephrase sentences depending on how we want them to sound.
Exactly. And these are just, a few examples. But the key takeaway here is really don't just blindly feed your text into that API. Take a moment to review it. Consider how you can optimize it for the best possible speech output.
That's great advice.
Yeah.
So shifting gears a bit, are there any common pitfalls or challenges that beginners tend to encounter when they're using OpenAI's API? What are some of the things that people trip up on?
Well, one thing that often causes confusion is API keys.
API keys, okay.
These keys are like your unique identifier that allow you to access OpenAI's services, right?
So how do we get our hands on these magical API keys?
You can easily create one on the OpenAI website.
Right.
They have very clear instructions on how to do it. But here's the thing. Treat your API key like a precious secret. Never share it publicly, and never, ever hard code it directly into your code.
Okay, that sounds like very sound advice. So what's the best way to handle these API keys in our code then?
Well, a good practice is to store your API key in what's called an environment variable.
Okay,
This way, it's kept separate from your main code, and it's a lot more secure.
that makes sense. Any other potential, like, stumbling blocks that our listeners should be aware of?
Another issue that can come up is hitting rate limits.
Rate limits.
OpenAI has certain usage limits to prevent abuse and ensure fair access for everyone, right? So if you exceed these limits, your requests might be throttled. They might even be blocked.
So we need to be mindful of how often we're making those requests to the API.
Exactly. The documentation outlines those rate limits.
Okay.
So make sure you familiarize yourself with them. And if you're working on like a large scale project or you need higher usage limits, you can always reach out to OpenAI's support team.
Okay, good to know.
Yeah. Now, before we wrap up, let's talk about troubleshooting.
Okay.
What should our listeners do if they encounter errors or unexpected behavior when they're using the API?
Right, 'cause that could definitely happen.
Oh, it happens all the time. So the first step is to always check those error messages.
Okay.
OpenAI, they provide really detailed error codes and descriptions,
Okay.
which can often point you in the right direction.
Yeah.
So, for instance, if you get an authentication error, it might mean that your API key is invalid or it's missing.
So those error messages, they're actually our friends, not our enemies.
They're your friends. They're trying to help you.
Yeah.
Exactly. They're there to help you figure out what's going wrong.
Awesome.
And if the error message itself isn't enough,
Yeah.
don't hesitate to consult the OpenAI documentation.
Okay.
They have a comprehensive troubleshooting section that covers common issues and solutions.
And if all else fails, there's always the OpenAI community forum, right?
Absolutely. The OpenAI community is incredibly helpful and responsive.
Yeah.
So chances are someone else has encountered that same problem you're facing.
Right.
And you can find solutions or guidance on the forum.
That's great. This has been so insightful.
You're great.
It feels like we've gone beyond just reading the documentation, like we've unpacked it,
I love that.
explored its nuances, really gotten a good understanding of how to use it effectively.
I'm so glad to hear that. And remember, even though we've covered a lot of ground today, there's always more to explore and learn.
Absolutely. The world of text-to-speech, it's constantly evolving with new features, new voices, new possibilities emerging all the time. So to wrap things up, what would be your, final piece of advice for our listeners as they, fire up those Python editors and dive into this really exciting world of text-to-speech with OpenAI?
I'd say don't be afraid to experiment and have fun with it.
I like that.
This technology is incredibly powerful and versatile, so think about those creative or practical applications that really excite you. Maybe it's, adding voice narration to your coding tutorials or creating a prototype for a voice-controlled game.
Yeah, I love that. We've talked about all the technical details, but ultimately it's about using this technology to bring your ideas to life, right?
Exactly. And remember, that OpenAI documentation, it's your friend. And with the knowledge you've gained from this deep dive, you're well equipped to navigate those docs with confidence and really unlock the potential of text-to-speech.
It's been an awesome journey through the world of OpenAI's text-to-speech. We've covered a lot of ground, from the basic concepts to some practical tips and even troubleshooting strategies.
I hope our listeners feel empowered to start building their own text-to-speech projects and explore all the amazing possibilities this technology has to offer.
I'm sure they do. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. It's been a pleasure exploring the intricacies of OpenAI's text-to-speech API with you.
It's been a pleasure being here.
And to all our listeners out there, happy coding, keep experimenting. We'll catch you on the next deep dive. All right, Python Explorers, today we're strapping on those digital hiking boots and heading straight into the heart of the OpenAI documentation.
Ooh, adventurous.
Right. Now, if you're a Python beginner with 3 months under your belt, I totally get it. These docs can feel like a dense jungle.
Yeah, definitely a lot to unpack there.
But trust me, with the right guide, you'll be navigating them like a pro in no time.
That's right. It's
Yeah.
all about building that mental roadmap so you can find the treasure and not get lost in the foliage.
Okay, so first things first, OpenAI. They're kind of a big deal in the AI world,
For sure.
They build super powerful tools for working with artificial intelligence, especially for things like, making computers understand us humans.
Exactly. It's like they're teaching computers to speak our language, literally.
And one of their coolest tools is this speech-to-text API. It lets you do amazing things with audio files, like transcribing podcasts or even translating foreign films. It's all powered by their open-source Whisper model.
Think of Whisper as the genius translator who can decipher almost any language, and you get to use their skills through this API.
Exactly. Now we're going to focus on two key endpoints today, transcriptions and translations. Now remember when I first started with APIs, these endpoints always trip me up.
Oh, yeah, I can see that.
Like what even is an endpoint?
Yeah, don't worry, they're not as complicated as they sound. Imagine you're building a robot and each endpoint is like a different button you can press to make it do something specific.
Ooh, I like that. So transcriptions, that's like the button to make your robot turn audio into text. And translations.
That's the button to make your robot translate that audio into English. It's like having a universal translator right there in your code.
So cool. Now, before we hit those buttons, let's talk about what kind of audio files a robot can handle. What formats are we talking about here?
Well, OpenAI is pretty flexible. They support most of the usual suspects, MP3, MP4, WAV, even some you might not use as often, like WBM. Basically, if it's audio, they've probably got you covered.
Sweet. But there's always a but, right? Like a file size limit or something.
Right. Think of it like your robot's carrying capacity. It can handle files up to 25 millibit, which is usually plenty for shorter audio clips. But don't worry, if you have a longer file, we'll show you a neat trick later on to break it down.
Okay, I'm intrigued. But first, let's get back to those buttons and how to actually use them. This is where our Python skills come in, right?
Exactly. And the beauty of the OpenAI API is that the code is surprisingly simple, even for beginners. In fact, the documentation gives you little snippets of code to get started. Think of them like pre-written commands for your robot.
Okay, so let's say I have an audio file called mypodcast.mp3 that I want to transcribe. What does that code snippet look like?
First, you'll need to import the OpenAI library, which is like giving your Python program access to all those cool robot controlling functions. Then you create an OpenAI client object, which is like establishing a connection to the robot itself.
Got it. So we're basically telling Python, hey, we're going to be working with OpenAI stuff here.
Exactly. Then you open your audio file and assign it to a variable. This is like handing the audio file to your robot. Finally, you call the transcriptions.create method on your client object.
Hold on. Call a method. That sounds a bit technical.
Don't worry. Think of it like pressing that transcriptions button on your robot. You're telling it, hey, take this audio file and turn it into text. You also tell it which model to use, which is like choosing the robot's brain. In this case, it's Ep.1, OpenAI's top-notch transcription model.
Okay, so it's like giving the robot a specific set of instructions.
Right.
And then what happens?
Then your robot, or rather the OpenAI API, works its magic and sends back the transcribed text. You can print it to your console, save it to a file, or do whatever you want with it.
That's pretty amazing. And you're saying this whole process is just a few lines of Python code.
That's the beauty of it. OpenAI has made it super user-friendly. They even provide code examples for different scenarios so you don't have to start from scratch.
Okay, I'm starting to see the light at the end of the documentation jungle. But before we get too comfortable, can we talk about customizing the output? Like what if I don't want the text in plain text format?
Great question. By default, the API will give you the text in a format called JSON, which is kind of like a neatly organized box of data. But you can definitely customize that.
So if I wanted it in plain text, like in a regular document, I could do that.
Exactly. You just need to use a special parameter called response format and set it to text. It's like telling your robot, hey, I want the output in this specific format.
Okay, this is making a lot more sense now. I'm feeling way less intimidated by the OpenAI documentation. But what about the other endpoint translations? Does the code look similar?
Very similar. The main difference is that you'll call the translations.create method instead of transcriptions.create. It's like pressing the translations button on your robot instead of the transcriptions button.
Right, so it's the same basic idea, just a different instruction for the robot. But are there any limitations with translations? Like, can it handle any language?
Well, currently, the OpenAI API only supports translation into English, but that's still pretty powerful if you're working with audio in multiple languages. And get this, the model behind it all. Whisper was trained on a massive data set of 98 languages.
Whoa, 98 languages. That's incredible. But does that mean it can transcribe and translate all 98 perfectly?
It can definitely produce output for a vast majority of those languages, but there's a smaller subset that they officially support for transcription and translation.
How do they decide which languages make the cut?
It all comes down to accuracy. They use something called the word error rate. Think of it as a test to see how well the model can transcribe a language. To get the official stamp of approval, a language needs to score a word error rate of less than 50%, meaning it can correctly transcribe at least half the words.
So it's like making sure the robot's translations are actually understandable, not just gibberish. Makes sense. But what are some of the languages that pass the test?
Well, the list is pretty impressive. It includes everything from Afrikaans to Vietnamese with a ton of languages in between. We're talking Arabic, Chinese, French, German, Hindi, Japanese, Korean, Russian, Spanish, you name it.
Wow, that's a serious linguistic lineup. Okay, I'm officially impressed with Whisper's language skills.
Yeah,
But before we dive into even more features, let's take a quick break and recap what we've learned so far.
sounds good. We've talked about OpenAI and their awesome speech-to-text API, which is all about turning audio into text and translating it. We've demystified the concept of endpoints and how they're like different buttons on our imaginary robot.
We've also explored the basics of the Python code and how OpenAI has made it surprisingly simple to use, even for beginners like us.
And we've learned that the API is pretty flexible when it comes to file formats and can even customize the output to fit your needs.
Plus, we've uncovered the amazing capabilities of Whisper and its multilingual superpowers. But like any good adventure, there's always more to explore.
That's right. Stay tuned for part 2, where we'll delve into some even cooler features and show you how to unlock the full potential of the OpenAI speech-to-text API. Welcome back. I hope you're ready for more because we're about to unlock some seriously cool features that'll take your OpenAI skills to the next level.
Okay, I'm all ears. We've covered the basics, but I'm eager to see what else this API can do. What's on the agenda for today?
Well, let's talk about prompting. You know how sometimes you can give an AI a little hint to help it understand things better?
Like when you're using those AI image generators and you give it a description of what you want.
Exactly. It turns out you can do something similar with the Whisper API. By providing a prompt, you can actually boost the accuracy of your transcriptions.
Yeah, wait, so we're giving Whisper a little cheat sheet before it starts transcribing? That's pretty clever. But how does that work exactly?
Let's say you're transcribing a formal lecture. You could provide a prompt like, "Good evening and welcome to tonight's lecture on the history of artificial intelligence."
So we're setting the tone and giving Whisper some context. I guess it makes sense. If the model knows it's dealing with a formal lecture, it'll be more likely to use proper grammar and punctuation.
Precisely. And it can even help with tricky words or acronyms. Let's say your audio mentions DLE or GPT-3, which are often misrecognized. You could include those terms in your prompt to give Whisper a heads up.
So it's like we're pre-teaching Whisper some of the vocabulary it might encounter. That's pretty neat.
Yeah.
But what about those filler words that we all use, like, or like? By default, Whisper tries to clean those up, right?
Right. But what if you're analyzing conversational speech and you want to preserve those nuances?
You'd want a way to tell Whisper, hey, keep those ums and likes in there. Can prompting help with that too?
Absolutely. You can include those filler words in your prompt to signal to Whisper that you want them included in the transcript.
So it's like giving Whisper a little style guide. This is how we talk in this audio, so transcribe it accordingly.
Yeah.
I love it. It feels like we're getting more and more control over the output.
You got it. And prompting can even be useful when you're dealing with languages that have different writing systems like Chinese.
Oh, that's interesting. So if I want my transcript in simplified Chinese, I should use a prompt written in simplified Chinese.
Exactly. By providing a prompt in your preferred writing style, you're guiding the model towards the desired output.
Okay, prompting seems incredibly powerful. It's like having a secret weapon for fine-tuning our transcripts. But let's be honest, sometimes Whisper might need a little extra help, right? What happens if we encounter a situation where it's just not quite cutting it?
That's a great question. Remember those other amazing tools in the OpenAI ecosystem? Like GPT-4, their super smart language model?
Yeah, I've heard of GPT-4. It's like the ultimate wordsmith, right? Can we actually use that to help us with our transcript?
Absolutely. GPT-4 is fantastic at understanding and generating human-like text, so we can use it for post-processing our transcripts.
So after Whisper does its thing, we can hand the transcript over to GPT-4 for a little polishing, like correcting errors, making it sound more natural, maybe even adding some stylistic flair.
Exactly. It's like having a team of AI editors working behind the scenes to refine our work.
This is blowing my mind. But before we get carried away with all these fancy techniques, let's go back to those larger audio files. Remember how we talked about splitting them into smaller chunks using PyDub?
Right. That's important for staying within that 25 millibit file size limit.
But isn't there a risk of losing context between segments? Like if the conversation topic shifts abruptly, could that affect the transcription accuracy?
That's a great point. And you guessed it, prompting can help here too. You can actually use the transcript of the preceding segment as a prompt for the current segment.
Whoa, that's clever. So we're essentially feeding Whisper a running transcript as we go, keeping it in the loop, so to speak.
Precisely. It's like giving Whisper a little memory boost, allowing it to leverage previous information for better context.
Okay, so we're basically training Whisper on the fly. But how much can it remember? Can we just feed it an entire novel as a prompt and expect it to remember everything?
Not quite. Whisper only considers the final 224 tokens of the prompt, which is roughly equivalent to a few sentences.
Okay, so we need to be strategic about what we include in the prompt, focusing on the most relevant contexts.
Exactly. It's a balancing act, but with a little practice, you'll get the hang of it.
This is incredible. We've gone from basic transcriptions to advanced techniques like prompting and post-processing with GPT-4. It's amazing how much power and flexibility the OpenAI API offers. I'm feeling so much more confident about tackling those docs now.
That's what we like to hear, but hold on tight because we still have more to uncover.
More. I'm already buzzing with ideas.
Yeah.
What else is in store for us in the final part of our OpenAI adventure?
Let's just say we'll be exploring the vast landscape of possibilities that this technology unlocks. Get ready to be inspired.
Welcome back, explorers. We've journeyed deep into the OpenAI speech-to-text. API tackled those daunting dogs and even learned some secret AI whispering techniques.
It's been quite a ride, hasn't it? We've gone from feeling lost in the documentation jungle to confidently navigating the terrain.
Totally. Remember how intimidated we were by those code snippets at the beginning? Now we're practically fluent in OpenAI's.
Exactly. We're adding prompts, tweaking parameters, even integrating other powerful tools like PyDub and GPT-4. It's amazing how much we can do with just a few lines of code.
Seriously. And to think we started this deep dive with the goal of helping Python beginners folks with about 3 months of experience feel more comfortable with the OpenAI documentation.
And look how far we've come. We've demystified complex concepts, explored advanced techniques, and unlocked a whole world of possibilities.
It really goes to show that you don't have to be a coding wizard to harness the power of AI. With a bit of curiosity, a willingness to learn, and the fantastic resources provided by OpenAI, anyone can build incredible things.
Speaking of building incredible things, remember how we focused on transcription and translation in this deep dive? That's just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the applications of this technology.
Oh yeah, my mind is racing with ideas. We could create applications that automatically generate subtitles for videos, transcribe meeting notes in real time, or even build interactive voice assistants.
You know, imagine a world where language barriers are a thing of the past, where anyone can communicate with anyone else regardless of their native tongue.
Or think about the potential for accessibility. We could use this technology to empower people with hearing impairments or learning differences to engage with audio content in new and exciting ways.
Absolutely. It's truly inspiring to think about the positive impact this technology can have on so many aspects of our lives.
And it all starts with taking that first step, diving into the documentation and experimenting.
Right. You know, don't be afraid to tinker, to try things out, to break things, and learn from your mistakes. That's how innovation happens.
So to all our listeners out there, I encourage you to embrace the challenge to explore the vast landscape of OpenAI and to never stop learning.
The future of AI is brimming with potential, and you have the power to shape it.
Head over to the OpenAI documentation, find the speech-to-text section, and start experimenting. Trust me, you'll be amazed by what you can create.
And as you embark on your AI journey, remember this: the only limit is your imagination.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep innovating, and keep diving deep into the fascinating world of technology.